The story begins in a dark forest. The hero stands in front of a hospital. At that moment, the system informs him that he has 30 minutes to reach the hospital. Ryan looked everything over and decided it was amazing that the lantern remained at all cool in such hot and humid weather. The smells of earth, trees, and damp air merged into one, and it was an extremely familiar, yet indescribable smell. Everyone says that this is the reverse side of reality, and at first glance, that is how it is. The story began 10 minutes ago, when Ryan and his classmates were still sitting in school and preparing for the lesson. His friend Theo approached him, and noticing that Ryan looked quite relaxed, asked him to remember to cover him when he went to the exam. Their conversation was interrupted by another classmate who said that in the Upside Down you can't rely on just a pretty face. At that moment, a girl in a suit entered the office, and all the boys immediately took their seats, realizing that the class president had arrived in the office. At that moment, the boy yawned. Ryan was a time traveler, although he understood that this world was practically no different from the one he lived in before. But the difference was that there was something more here than the real world. The most important thing here is the existence of the inside out. Meanwhile, the teacher placed a strange device with a timer on the table and said that she had heard that the difficulty of the task this time was not too high, so there was no reason to worry. But the students noticed that they had been told the same thing last time, so they decided to stop the test as soon as their chance for resurrection ended. At that moment, Ryan believed that since the first appearance of the Upside Down, he had been doing exactly this, appearing in different places, possessing people, and that was why humanity had decided to separate this world from the real one. In this world, there existed so-called Moroks, creatures possessing their own consciousness. Such an SOS-ranked Morok could easily destroy an entire city. Long ago, there lived a man who made a pact in the Upside Down and brought into this world a forbidden object called the Stone of Cunning, thereby giving people a chance to avoid being suddenly sent to the Upside Down. Instead, they can enter voluntarily with the possibility of resurrection. The government has decreed that every resident, upon reaching adulthood, must accept the challenge of the Upside Down. And Ryan realized that today he would enter this Upside Down for the first time. Meanwhile, the teacher said that she would look forward to the children's return, but they should not forget that they would have to leave immediately as soon as the number of resurrections reached 0. She started the countdown with a serious expression on her face. After counting to 1, she pressed a button on the strange device and announced that the Upside Down test was beginning. Then the hero found himself in a place that resembled a park at night. The system showed that he had 50 magic power points, and Ryan was quite surprised since this number is usually 10 at the beginning. He jokingly noted that this could be a special advantage for attractive guys like himself. He looked at the hospital building and didn't understand why they were given half an hour to get there, since the building was located very close. But at that moment, an unfamiliar woman with blonde hair appeared behind him and calmly greeted him. The hero froze in place, not understanding why he encountered a secret at the very beginning. At that moment, a girl in a long red dress and a medical mask hugged him from behind and asked if he thought she was beautiful. In response, Ryan began nodding frantically. As soon as the woman heard his answer, she removed her mask, revealing her terrifying mouth full of sharp fangs, and took out a huge pair of scissors, asking him if he still thought she was beautiful. At that moment, Ryan realized that standing before him was a Kutisaki Onna, a character from a famous Japanese legend about a beautiful woman who was disfigured and killed by a jealous husband, and then returned to the world as a vengeful evil spirit. The boy remembered that they had discussed this riddle in class and decided to calm down and think for a bit. But he soon realized that he had completely forgotten everything they had said. Then the girl walked up to him and opened her creepy mouth wide, asking if he thought she was beautiful. Suddenly Ryan started making incoherent sounds and acting crazy. Kuchisake Onna passed by him and looked closely at the strange guy. But the hero continued to act like a fool. He suddenly took advantage of the moment and ran away, leaving the young girl perplexed. He was confident that he could escape because he usually runs 100 meters in 10 seconds. However, literally a second later, Kuchiseki Onna appeared next to Ryan and with a threatening smile asked him again if she was beautiful. She said that since Ryan thought she was beautiful, she was going to make him as handsome as she was, but the guy pretended not to understand Japanese. The girl then took out the scissors again and asked Ryan again if he thought she was beautiful. At that moment, the main character got fed up with all this. He extended his hand and asked the girl to calm down. He took advantage of the moment and left her. He chuckled and asked if she felt sorry for him. At that moment, a look of bewilderment appeared on the girl's face. She believed that this guy had really gone crazy. She rushed after him and asked the same question again, and Ryan had no choice but to run in the opposite direction. He soon realized that he had reached a dead end, and a strange girl appeared right in front of him. The heroine couldn't understand how she managed to move so quickly in heels. Then the girl walked straight up to him and asked him again if he thought she was beautiful. Ryan was confused because the girl kept repeating the same thing over and over again, like a tutor in class. Without waiting for an answer, she pointed her demonic scissors at him, thinking that this guy was being very cunning and was deliberately ignoring her. She also decided to torment him a little, and in order to improve his performance indicators, decided to deviate from the rules a little. She then ordered the scissors to rush straight towards Ryan. The hero covered himself with his hands and believed that at the beginning, everything went according to plan. At that moment, a strange black spot appeared in front of him, which warned him of the danger and then protected him from the blow of the scissors. The girl was horrified. She couldn't understand how this guy managed to repel her attack. At that moment, the system gave Ryan a clue. It told him that the blood-stained deception, her hands, her ugliness, and her loneliness made her thirst for revenge. All she longed for was a drop of love and a drop of warmth. At some point, the hero froze in place and did not understand how to react to this. But he was glad that the system provided him with hints in this format. He turned to the ghost girl and said that he was now going to commit suicide. He pointed his finger at her, but at that moment, the system signaled that after reading the hint, it would disappear. A look of confusion crossed Ryan's face as he realized the system was starting to fade away. Then the girl turned to him and said that he shouldn't have teased her. What she hated most were men who behaved like that. At that moment, Ryan realized that he had ruined everything. Now the girl was furious and was going to kill him so he could no longer remain calm. Then the girl lowered her face and softly repeated her question. She opened her demonic, bloody mouth and asked Ryan if she was beautiful. But at that moment, the hero suddenly rushed towards her and hugged her as if she were his girlfriend. The girl looked at him with bewilderment and embarrassedly asked what he was doing. At that moment, Ryan took into account the fact that he could still understand the prompts. And what's more, the system was clearly telling him what to do. Then he turned to the girl and told her that he believed true love only comes once, and people don't appreciate it until they lose it. But the girl stopped him and ordered him to shut up. Ryan's face showed confusion when he realized that the ghost girl didn't believe him. He decided not to delay, leaned towards her and kissed her. Confusion appeared on the girl's face, but she still responded to the kiss. Suddenly, the hero abruptly pulled away from her and turned away. At that moment, the girl screamed at him, grabbed his face with her hands, and called him a bastard. Meanwhile, Ryan realized that in addition to the taste of blood, he felt a sweet aftertaste. Then the girl jumped to her feet, closed her eyes, and shouted that her name was Sarah. She then ran away, promising to take revenge on Ryan once and for all, and that he would pay for what he did to her. Meanwhile, the hero turned away, considering that the kiss was quite delicious. Meanwhile, the system informed him that he had completed a hidden task and received a forbidden item called the Crimson Scissors. Ryan also didn't think he could get banned items at the very beginning, even if they were the lowest level items that could be sold for around 100,000 points. But these scissors were banned. He took up the new weapon and decided that from now on he could no longer be a coward since it contained the aura of the protagonist. When Ryan was taken to the hospital, the system told him he was expected to care for patients as a nurse for 7 days. The system also told him that a good relationship between the patient and the nurse would earn him extra points, but that the patients were also very dangerous, and that when night fell, he could sleep peacefully, but should not open his eyes. When Ryan walked in and asked if anyone was there, a girl in red shoes came out to greet him. Looking up, he noticed a woman in a nurse's uniform who recognized him as a newcomer. She approached him and told him that he was responsible for 4 patients and that he should return in the evening to collect his payment. She also noted that the patients in room 401 required special care. Ryan then turned to the stranger and asked if there was anyone else besides him, but the woman replied that he would find out during labor. She also noticed with a smile that someone had died here just recently. But, although it was terrible, he liked it very much. At that moment, the hero went cold. He didn't understand why the nurse was saying that this man was being eaten if the subjects were supposed to attempt resurrection. He began to walk around the hospital and inspect his new workplace. He went to the registration office and was surprised to find that the nurse on duty was not there. He studied the hospital plan and discovered that there were 8 rooms on this floor, but only 4 of them were occupied by patients, which meant that he would have half as much work. After all, it was an E-level task, and if you think about it, it shouldn't be too difficult. So Ryan decided to head to room 401 first. Arriving at the right room, he noticed that the entire door of this room was covered in blood. The system told him that there were some very noisy patients in the room, and when Ryan opened the door, a human head would fly out, and even if the attack was not fatal, he risked losing the respect of his patients. The hero decides to take out his newly received scissors. He broke down the door and decided to act with maximum confidence. As expected, a head flew towards him, its eyes glowing ominously green. But Ryan didn't lose his composure and hit his opponent on the head with scissors, pinning him to the ground. At that moment, the light in the room turned on, and the hero realized that he was not alone. One of the patients looked at him with horror, and behind him stood the girl to whom, apparently, this head belonged. On the other bed sat a small girl, watching what was happening in amazement and holding a teddy bear in her hands. Ryan watched them with a smile, not understanding why they were being told they were making noise when it was quite quiet here. But the patient didn't understand what was wrong with this guy, because the girl was just joking, and he stuck scissors into her head. The guy was horrified when he realized that this man had unusual abilities and these huge, strange scissors. Ryan then introduced himself and said he was going to be their new brother, and the head nurse said one of them needed special care. Hearing the voice of a patient needing help, he realized that he had accidentally stuck the scissors into his head and said that he would pull them out right now. At that moment, the system told him that if he took the scissors away from his head, they would eat him alive. However, looking down, he noticed the face of a young girl who, in an innocent voice, asked him to take the scissors. But instead, the hero opened them, thereby disfiguring this head. Other patients were horrified to see what was left of their friend's head. Ryan then laughed and apologized, saying he didn't realize his head would be so fragile. He turned to the other patients and asked if any of them needed special care. The patients began to cry in fear and shout that they didn't need anything. He turned to the girl's decapitated body and said that if she wanted, he could sew her head back on, but she refused and said that she would do it herself. At that moment, an announcement came over the loudspeaker that a nurse was needed for room 402. Ryan assumed it was extra work for him. He believed that after completing his duties as head nurse, he would be able to go home immediately. He soon reached the right door, and the system didn't give him any clues, so Ryan figured everything would probably be okay. He opened the door, greeted those inside, and asked who had called the nurse. At that moment, he noticed a strange creature in the form of a nurse running towards him, but its face was distorted. She grabbed him by the shoulder and pointed her finger somewhere behind her, shouting something in an incomprehensible language. At that moment, Ryan noticed someone's head drop down, which told him that the nurse meant that the child was scared and asking Ryan to calm him down. The patient suspended from the ceiling then pointed to a nearby table on which lay a crying baby. The hero was surprised and asked why they couldn't take care of it themselves, to which the patient replied that there were nurses in the hospital who did this. Ryan then said he wanted to see what would happen if he didn't do it, since he wasn't the child's grandmother. When he picked up the baby, the system told him that if patients ate staff who were not doing their jobs, the head nurse would do nothing to them. Ryan tried to calm the baby down, but the baby replied that he was hungry and that if his story was wrong, he would eat him. However, seeing no emotion on Ryan's face, he was confused and didn't understand why this guy was so calm. Then the hero said that he was going to tell her a story about 4 babies with antennae on their heads. At that moment, the baby suddenly opened his demonic mouth and said that it was a bad story and that he could not sleep. He wanted to bite Ryan, but at that moment, the hero took out a pair of scissors and stuck them in the baby's mouth. He sternly told her that her mother should have taught her not to interrupt those who were telling stories. Meanwhile, the rest of the students gathered in the hall and discussed how one student was eaten by his patient, another patient was left with only half a body, and they all felt that they could not cope with the task. At that moment, the hero entered the room and said with a smile that he had to tell the story. Meanwhile, the guys noticed a man passing by and said that the head nurse had finally arrived. They all turned their attention to the very woman whom the hero met at the very beginning of the mission. One of the students approached the nurse and told her that she had done an excellent job. But instead of words of gratitude, the girl hit him on the head with her hand. Seeing this, the other patients were horrified. The nurse approached them and said that she knew about the uncompleted homework, the numerous complaints of the patients, and therefore she considered the students useless creatures. She handed each of them an envelope and said that this was their salary, depending on their work. She also stated that there is a vending machine on each floor where you can buy food and drinks using your accumulated points. But now they would have to spend the night in the waiting rooms on their floors, after which the girl called the cleaner to follow her and told him that her room was in the basement. She then turned to the students and warned them again that they must all go to bed at night. She said that they should not open their eyes under any circumstances, otherwise they would be responsible for their own lives. Soon after, the students used vending machines to buy food. Ryan noted that they received 100 coins, 30 of which were used to buy water and food. He suddenly noticed that the machine also sold a flashlight for 500 points, but decided to put it off until later, as it was time for him to go to bed. As he was going to bed, he noticed in his dream a strange building that resembled a tall tower. As the hero approached the entrance, he noticed an inscription above the door indicating that this building was called the Heavenly Prison. Ryan counted how many times he had dreamed about this place this month. He approached the gate, blocking the entrance to the building, and realized that he might not be able to lift it. He didn't like to dream, but he wasn't allowed to look into them, so he decided to continue sleeping. Meanwhile, he was in his room, sleeping peacefully on his bed. He had no idea that at that moment a strange ghostly creature with a terrifying appearance was standing above him. The next day, all the guys gathered at the agreed-upon place discussed the fact that something had scratched his wall the previous night. Someone said that his late grandmother had appeared at his bedside, and Ryan noticed that there were fewer students. At that moment, one of the students came up to him from behind and called out his name. She said sheepishly and asked if he could lend her 50 coins. It seemed to her that everyone had experienced some kind of madness that night, and only Ryan looked happy, so Kira assumed that he had found some kind of treasure. She said that she had received only 5 coins yesterday, spent them on water, and was now very hungry. She said that if he would lend her money, she would do whatever he wanted in return. But Ryan noticed the head nurse was already there, so he said they'd discuss it later. He calculated that in 7 working days, they could earn a maximum of 700 coins. He wanted to buy a flashlight, but he didn't have enough money. At that moment, the nurse announced that they had 5 losers. The girl repeated once again that they should not open their eyes after dark, but decreed that they should continue working, and as soon as the students received the task, they should immediately begin to complete it. Having received the task, the hero found himself next to room number 403. Today, he had to deliver medication to a patient in this department. He asked the other patients for news of this man, to which the headless girl replied that they had not met, but she knew that the patients who had eaten the medical staff were in rooms 403 and 404. Another patient stated that he had never met the patient from room 403 and that he believed the last time she bit a nurse on the arm. Meanwhile, the hero held a glass of jasmine coffee in his hand, as well as shards of glass, and thought to himself that, judging by the reactions of the other patients, he should be more careful. Entering the room, he noticed a young red-haired girl reading something. He said that he was bringing her an order. But he didn't understand why she didn't buy it herself, because instant coffee costs 50 coins, and if he didn't have enough money, he would have to shed his blood. Soon the girl took the glass and drank the drink that the hero brought her. As soon as she smelled the wonderful aroma, she immediately drank the drink in one gulp. She said it was incredibly delicious, then gave him some money and asked Ryan to bring her a cup of coffee every day. When the hero left the room, he was delighted with the cash gift from the rich girl. He walked up to the machine and immediately spent all the money he received on food and a flashlight. After purchasing it, the system informed him that a special quest called the Bloody Knight's Painful Scream had been unlocked for him. Suddenly, he heard Kira's voice behind him, screaming that she needed help because a monster was chasing her. She said that she would do whatever Ryan wanted if he saved her. However, as soon as the girl got close enough to the protagonist, he hit her hard in the face. The girl jumped back and barely managed to stay on her feet. She looked at Ryan and asked him why he did that since they were classmates. The hero then declared that, thanks to his intelligence, he had no difficulty in figuring out his plan. He said that there must be a birthmark on Kira's left breast and advised the monster to act more professionally next time. Ryan guessed that it was probably a level F Marok, and that now would be the best time to train. When the monster realized that a fight was inevitable, it took on its own form, tore off its face, and declared that in that case it would allow Ryan to become its prey. But at that moment, the hero rushed at the ghost and hit him with scissors with all his might. The monster grabbed the blades and, in a panic, began demanding that Ryan wait. But the hero did not stop and continued to beat the monster with scissors. In the evening, the head nurse handed him 3 envelopes and congratulated him on his excellent work. The hero was pleasantly surprised by such a large reward, and then the woman said that now everyone was free. The other students were openly jealous of him because each of them also received an envelope. Then one of the students, a class monitor named Damien, said that he wanted to suggest something. This was just the beginning, so he had an idea. He said that it was only the second day of their exam and they had already lost most of their classmates, so as the class president, he had to say it. Damien stated that it was likely that if they didn't work together, neither of them would survive. If they wanted to change their lives, they should take this opportunity. He also said that he had received a sword, and although it was not a forbidden item, it was still capable of causing harm to secrets, and he was also worried about that lantern, but they could only get it if they saved up the required amount. Ryan believed that Damien had planned the whole thing because he wanted to find out why the head nurse had praised him and also to get his hands on the other boys' body parts. It was a good idea, but Ryan wasn't interested. He said goodbye to his classmates and headed to his room. Damien tried to stop him and said that if Ryan was in any danger, he could find him on the 7th floor. Meanwhile, the hero was pondering a task called the Sad Cry of the Bloody Night. This task involves a flashlight, meaning she's literally asking Ryan to leave his room in the middle of the night to look for clues. Even though the head nurse told him not to open his eyes in the middle of the night, he had prohibited items and his own system, so there was no point in staying there. The results of the first test are extremely important, and if he can pass the main task, he is guaranteed a place, despite high scores on the entrance exam. But if he can pass the special task, top universities will want to get him. He also had the option of working in a team, but this is a mysterious world, and everyone here has their own interests, so this option was not suitable for him. After all, Damien was not a good person. Soon Ryan decided to take a nap, and when he opened his eyes, he seemed to be in some strange place. He thought he was still awake, but when he opened his eyes, he was terrified. He thought he was in a hospital room, but now the situation seemed much more alarming. The hero assumed that this is what the hospital actually looks like. He took a flashlight with him and headed for the exit. He had a premonition that this time everything would be much more dangerous than he thought. Suddenly, he heard strange sounds behind the door and, assuming that someone was there, decided to look through the peephole. Looking there, he noticed a terrifying eye of a man who did not even have eyelids. Ryan went very cold and jumped back from the door. At that moment, he heard someone's voice asking him to open the door and saying that a monster was chasing him. The hero realized that he couldn't open the door because he didn't know who was behind it, and besides, the students had the ability to resurrect, and if he rushed inside, he would get hurt. It turned out that at that time there really was a monster hiding behind his door, pretending to be his classmates. He used their appearance and voices to imitate their characters. When the hero noticed a pool of blood under his door, he realized that the problem was solved. Suddenly, he heard someone's voice behind him asking Ryan why he didn't save him. The guy immediately turned around and shone a flashlight in front of him, not understanding how this monster ended up there. The shadow-like monster said that they had studied together for 3 years, but now it was forced to die alone, wishing for Ryan's death before dissolving into a bright light. When the monster's body fell to the ground, the hero was finally able to catch his breath and thanked all the gods for having a flashlight with them. This ghost could have entered here without warning, but he decided to knock on the door. He must have been an actor in a past life. Suddenly, the hero glanced toward the window and thought he heard a woman's scream. At that moment, the system informed him that his task completion had dropped to 10%. Ryan believed that the greater the difficulty of the task, the greater the reward for completing it, and if he wanted to progress further in completing the task, he needed to find this woman. From what he heard, she wasn't there, but he only had 2 hours and 47 minutes left, so he needed to hurry, but the system wasn't responding to his attempts. Therefore, the hero decided that in this case, he should sleep until the next day. The next day, he came to visit his patient and told her that the previous night, in the middle of the night, someone had been disturbing other people with shouting and crying, and he asked if she knew what had happened. And suddenly the girl opened her eyes wide and advised the guy not to pay attention to it. She rushed towards him and started shouting that in that case, the head nurse would finish them all off. The hero didn't know how to react. He thought that it must have something to do with the head nurse, and that the patient was obviously very afraid of her. Soon after, he left the room and decided that he must complete the task given to him by the head nurse for the day and go in search of evidence. While he was thinking about what he should do today, someone appeared behind him and called his name. Ryan decided not to take any chances and immediately pulled out his scissors, ready to defend himself. But suddenly he noticed that it was not a monster in front of him, but his classmate Oscar. The guy said he heard Ryan going to the 8th floor and told him he used to work with another guy. But when he went to the bathroom, he simply disappeared. After being resurrected, he told Oscar that there was a secret in the toilet that asked him what kind of paper he wanted, red, yellow, or white, and he chose white. Oscar knew it would be difficult for Ryan to work with him, but he hoped he could fulfill one of his demands. In response, the hero grinned and said that he believed him and would do everything in his power. When evening came, he reached the toilet, and the system laughed at him, not understanding why he had been sitting on the toilet for so long. Suddenly, he noticed someone slipping 3 multicolored sheets of paper under his door. A mysterious voice asked Ryan which piece of paper he would choose. But instead of answering, the hero simply kicked down the toilet door and punched the man standing behind it. It turned out that it was one of the patients who was simply bullying the students. But the hero decided not to let him get away with it and beat him with scissors. The patient handed him a wad of bills and said that it was all he had, continuing to beg him to let him go. The hero agreed, took all the money, and headed for the exit. But he suddenly turned around, walked up to the patient, grabbed him by the hair, and asked if he knew where the patient from room 404 was now. When the man said he was in the women's restroom across the street, it turned out that an elderly man with a huge scar on his forehead was sitting there. The system told him that this patient apparently suffered from alcohol addiction. So when Ryan found him, the first thing he did was offer him a strong alcoholic drink to take with him. The man immediately agreed and quickly drank his drink in the room. Ryan decided to take advantage of the moment and asked him if he knew who was crying in that hospital in the middle of the night. The man looked at him and asked why he was interested. Ryan replied that he was simply curious and added that he still had a few bottles of alcohol left. The old man then declared that if he continued to dig into this matter, the head nurse would kill him immediately. But he said he could still tell what it was if Ryan was really interested. The old man said that the main character should go up and see everything with his own eyes. Soon the hero found himself on the roof and began to examine the surroundings in search of something outlandish. But he soon realized that this was the roof of an ordinary hospital, although he noticed that the sky here was red. He also noticed that from here he could not see the road he had come along or any other buildings. But Ryan realized that now was not the time for such thoughts. He had come here to find evidence, and if he couldn't do it during the day, he would try to do it at night. At that moment, he noticed something strange and shiny in the corner and realized that it was a telephone. Ryan took a closer look and noticed that it was a fairly cheap phone. At that moment, the system informed him that his task had reached 50% completion. The hero was pleased with the result and realized that this was the key element of this task. Then the system gave him a hint that there was a secret hidden in the shadows unknown to anyone. When you understand other people's secrets, they can begin to understand yours too. Suddenly, the hero stood up and realized that he could sense an aura of mystery that surpassed F level. She didn't like it because she hadn't yet allowed him to handle higher-level mysteries. But suddenly, a nurse appeared behind him and asked what he was doing there. The hero scratched the back of his head and said that he simply went out to get some fresh air. But the woman looked at him menacingly and asked if he really didn't know about his missions. Ryan stood up and said that he had already found a patient in room 404, but his room smelled so bad that he decided to come here to freshen his breath. At that moment, he hid the scissors behind his back, but Ryan knew that if the nurse found out the truth, he wouldn't be able to defeat her, so he could only hope that she would believe him. Then the girl sighed tiredly and told him to get out of there. That evening, the boys began to discuss how they trusted the president, but in the end, he took all their money for himself. As he passed Ryan, Damien laughed and said that he was glad he hadn't teamed up with him and that it seemed like he was actually lucky. The hero was horrified when he realized that he had actually been collecting coins from other students. The hero then went to his room and decided to check what was on his phone, but for some reason, it didn't turn on. He remembered the instructions the system had given him and suddenly realized that, based on them, the phone could only be used at night. When it was already late in the evening, he picked up the phone again, and this time, it worked. He opened his phone, but realized there was only one video on it. When the hero opened it, he seemed to notice himself, his exact copy sitting on the bed and looking at something on the phone. But suddenly his distorted face appeared on the screen, looking straight into the camera, and the same thing was displayed on the screen of the phone he was holding. Ryan realized with horror that it was him in the video. Suddenly he noticed his double take out a knife and put it to his face. He cut his cheek, and suddenly the hero realized that he also had a cut on his face, so the video was synchronized with it. He glanced at the screen and noticed how his copy took out a knife and put it to his throat. The hero started shouting at the screen, but realized that he could do nothing. Suddenly, an idea came to him, and he pointed the flashlight directly at the phone screen. Soon a cry was heard begging him to turn off the flashlight. The hero realized that this was indeed dangerous, and was glad that this flashlight was extremely effective against the Moroks, otherwise he would have died long ago. He also realized that this phone was indeed a key item that increased his progress in the mission by 30%, but it was also dangerous. Suddenly, another 27-second video appeared on his phone, and Ryan thought that maybe this was the original. He opened the video and it showed a young girl begging the man filming her to let her go. The man backstage laughed and said that the girl was very strong, but this only increased his sympathy for her. Then the girl in the nurse's uniform turned sharply and punched him in the face. The man then grabbed her by the hair and began to rip off her clothes, after which he asked if she really wanted to drink that nasty stuff again, despite the fact that he had been so kind to her. Then a girl in underwear appeared in the video, and the hero recognized her as the head nurse from his youth. Now it was important for the young man to find out the identity of the person captured on video. After watching the recording to the end, he did not understand why the progress of his task remained unchanged. He wondered if he had missed some important detail. Deciding to figure it out, he began to rewind the video frame by frame. At the 17th second, his gaze stopped on a link pointing to room 1401. Realizing that this was a vital clue to his special mission, he noted that he had made 60% progress. His next task was to find Unit 1401. After the arduous climb to the 14th floor, Ryan was exhausted and his clothes were soaked with sweat. Although he had hoped to use the elevator, the system warned him of the major dangers of that route. He understood that this department must be located somewhere here. As he pushed the door open, his ears caught the distinct sound of heels. Ryan immediately hid to avoid being seen and noticed a nurse walking down the hallway. At first, he thought that she was the head nurse, but after taking a closer look, he realized that she was an ordinary nurse, although her bloody dress and the knife in her hand were alarming. His movements were strange, like those of a zombie. Luckily, the nurse walked past Ryan without noticing him, and he was able to breathe a sigh of relief. But suddenly he heard someone calling him, and a strange creature with many eyes appeared from the darkness, grabbed him by the leg, and invited him to play. The young man shuddered, but coming to his senses, shone a flashlight on the creature's face, causing it to disappear. Suddenly, quite unexpectedly, a nurse appeared behind him, motionless and strangely silent. Ryan immediately shone the flashlight on her, but instead of stopping, she collapsed to the ground and crawled toward him. Not understanding why the flashlight had no effect on her, he began to retreat. He rushed up the stairs, apparently with the intention of reaching the roof. The nurse wasted no time in throwing a knife at Ryan, but he managed to dodge it. Realizing he had no other choice, he rushed to the roof, holding the flashlight between his teeth. On the roof, he realized, with relief, that the nurse couldn't follow him, as if something was holding her back. Calming down, he mentally praised his intuition. He knew that in situations like this, running away was a natural reflex, but thanks to the nurse's speed, without the invisible barrier, she would have caught him. Standing on the edge of the roof, he came to the conclusion that fear might be the key to everything. He surmised that the patient's fear somehow influenced the medical staff, changing their behavior. This assumption led him to believe that the source of the crying he had heard earlier was also connected to this strange phenomenon. His thoughts were interrupted by a small girl with white hair who approached him on the roof. Her name was Lily. She was sobbing, wiping away tears, and in a trembling voice asked who he was. The system seemed to pick up on her thoughts, revealing that the girl was deeply troubled by the reason everyone around her was afraid of her. She admitted that all she wanted was to eat candy, play, and make friends. After asking if she'd done something wrong, the hero suddenly noticed that the girl was barefoot. Ryan then carefully approached the girl, gently ran his hand over her head, and remarked that her name sounded quite pleasant. He assured her that he had climbed up to the roof specifically to play with her. A little later, they went down to the 14th floor, where he bought her a lot of candy. The girl was beside herself with joy, sincerely delighted with each gift. The hero knelt before her, and, trying to look serious, asked if she could join him. She agreed without hesitation, making it clear that she was ready to support him as an older brother. Ryan remembered the girl's kindness and gentleness with fondness, but he was also overcome with sadness when he realized that she didn't appear to have her mother with her and that she wasn't wearing shoes. As he walked down the dark corridor, he held her small hand in his, lighting the way with the flashlight he held in his other hand. But he understood that their path led to room 1401, where he had to find out what had happened. When they reached the right door, the girl squeezed his leg tighter, as if she felt that something terrible was lurking behind it. Ryan opened the door carefully, trying not to draw attention to himself. The girl asked him what he saw, but he quickly covered her eyes with his hand, trying to protect her from what was happening inside. The room was filled with horror. In the center hung a man in a white coat, crucified on a cross and showing almost no signs of life. The hero couldn't believe that something so terrible could happen here. Standing in front of him was a nurse, the same one Ryan had seen earlier. The man choked and stuttered, apologizing as the nurse slit his throat with horrific precision. Ryan found it hard to believe that this was true and wondered if this was really room 1401. Blood gushed onto the floor, and the victim's torn skin made him look like a plucked duck. Ryan was overcome with disgust, and he realized that the girl absolutely mustn't see this. The man on the cross suddenly turned his head and looked at him, asking for help. But the nurse, seemingly devoid of emotion, continued to beat him. Suddenly, the hero noticed how the man's cut-off tongue flew towards the door. Ryan was sure that the man would definitely die then, but literally a second later he again began to beg the nurse to let him go. The situation became even stranger when Ryan noticed that what was happening seemed to be repeating itself over and over again, like an eerie, vicious circle. The crucified man assured her that this would not happen again, but his words did not seem convincing to the young girl. The distraught nurse continued to torment the poor doctor while he died endlessly, and then came back to life to suffer again. It was already almost 4 o'clock in the morning, but it seemed as if the torment in this room would never end. Suddenly, Sonia felt ill, and trembling with fear, she begged him to leave. He decided to grant her request, realizing that staying there was no longer possible. He asked the girl to close her eyes as they left the room to protect her from what she saw. The hero then took them both to a safe place. Returning to the roof, the girl cautiously asked if she could open her eyes. Then Ryan handed him a large, multicolored lollipop. This gift brought a smile to Sonia's face again. She was delighted with this bright present. The girl happily accepted the gift and thanked Ryan. She asked him if he would come back and play with her. Ryan assured her that they would definitely see each other again. Later, the system informed him that the task had reached 70% completion. This news filled him with enthusiasm, as success meant not only completing the task, but also the opportunity to receive recommendations from prestigious universities, as well as a $1 million prize. Even in another world, Ryan knew he couldn't afford to fail because he was doing this for his sister. He dreamed of giving her a life in which she would not be able to deny herself anything. As he was walking down the stairs, he bumped into his homeroom teacher, Damien. The hero, seeing the flashlight in his hand, realized that he had already accumulated 500 coins, which perhaps indicated his own task. Damien then suggested that they might have the same clue, but Ryan warned him against returning to the 14th floor, calling it suicide. The elder mentioned that Ryan had managed to return alive, but added that it was impossible to obtain the reward alone, and made it clear that he himself intended to fight for it at any cost. At 6:30 in the morning, the girl loudly scolded the students for using forced injections on patients, raining down a stream of reproaches on them and calling them idiots for such reckless behavior, which only made the situation worse. Nearby, another girl, hugging her friend, cautiously shared her long-held suspicions that something was definitely wrong with this place. She noted that this was her first time in the mysterious world, and wondered aloud whether the difficulty of quests should be limited based on their rank. She was particularly concerned about why the difficulty level of the current task seemed significantly higher than was appropriate for their class, as it was more in line with the tasks of the next level. Oscar, who was standing nearby, also remembered that 13 people had already died, and that these deaths occurred after Victoria made a pact with the spirit. Each of the 13 dead had their own spirit, but only Victoria remained alive. The long-haired boy waved his hand in annoyance and declared that he was tired of these games, admitting that even if the possibility of resurrection still existed, the pain he was experiencing was terribly real, and he could no longer bear this torment and die under such conditions. In that moment, Ryan realized that the morning's task had caused many to give up and leave the game. Her attention was soon drawn to Damien, who had somehow managed to return alive from the 14th floor. This seemed incredible to her, and she began to wonder if it was possible that the boss was hiding on that floor. Damien approached his classmates and asked if any of them had other resurrection points. His words were met with confused looks and tense silence. Ryan was surprised by this reaction and asked his classmates if they were already dead. The president explained that the nurse killed Damien instantly. Kira, who was standing nearby, added that she herself died when the ceiling collapsed on her, and Oscar mentioned that he was crushed by a wardrobe. These revelations enraged the hero. He demanded to know why they continued to remain in this world if they no longer had resurrection points, and warned them that if they died again, this time their death would be permanent. Trying to dispel their doubts, Kira reminded them that completing a special mission could still guarantee them admission to a prestigious university. She emphasized that after all the betrayals she had to endure, her resolve only strengthened, and the young girl firmly stated that she did not intend to give up. She added that achieving this task would be proof of their strength and named Qingdao and Qingming universities as targets. Meanwhile, Ryan arrived in room 404, where he completed another task, administering an injection to a drunk patient. Although the task wasn't particularly difficult, he mentally congratulated himself on his patience. Walking out into the hallway, Ryan checked on the well-being of the other patients and met Damien standing near the lockers. Ryan gave him a dubious look and sarcastically asked if he expected his help or advice in completing the task. He added that he was not going to risk his life to help the boy, as his behavior constantly fluctuated between kindness and cruelty, which often frightened those around him. But suddenly, Damien bowed and apologized for his previous actions. He explained that he had no choice, as this special mission was vital to him. Ryan wasn't expecting this turn of events, and, somewhat surprised, asked Damien why he was even apologizing. He replied that he didn't need to apologize since he, personally, hadn't received a single coin. Damien, humbly assuming his human form, apologized again for any trouble he might have caused. Before leaving, he mentioned that he had met a patient who knew the head nurse. The patient informed him that she was in charge of room 1401 and advised him to visit her room, but Damien admitted that he could not do so. Hearing this, Ryan turned sharply and, hugging Damien, asked him to repeat what he had just said. Damien couldn't believe how quickly Ryan had changed his mind. Smiling, the hero reminded him that they were classmates and that he couldn't just leave his friend in trouble. He also added that he had avenged their classmate the day before, and if Ryan didn't believe him, he could ask Oscar. Meanwhile, in another room, a large patient was calmly eating fast food and watching cartoons. His room was so disorganized that he began to wonder if he should ask the head nurse to change the sheets. Suddenly, the door to his room burst open and several patients rushed in, led by an alcoholic holding a huge syringe on his shoulder, resembling a strange team of superhero rescuers. The overweight patient, shocked by what was happening, could not understand what was happening. The group's leader pointed a syringe at him, accusing him of bullying his younger brother, and soon the entire group attacked the large patient, who, in a panic, begged them to leave, promising to inject himself if they stopped the attack. Ryan and Damien watched the chaotic scene from afar. Damien immediately realized it was related to the E-rank secrets and noticed that the class representative seemed to be in control of the proceedings. Whispering softly to Ryan, Damien told him about the head nurse's office. Soon Ryan found himself alone at the elevator, waiting for his car, and Damien told him that the head nurse usually rested on at least the 4th floor, and that the only way to get her there was by elevator. When the elevator arrived, Ryan stepped inside to find a pink-haired girl already standing inside. She immediately asked him if he was going to the morgue, and when he answered in the affirmative, she hesitated for a moment, sensing that something was wrong. She noticed that Ryan seemed to have taken the wrong medicine, because even she was afraid of the ghosts that lived there, despite not being human herself. The young girl began to talk about the rumors circulating around the hospital, claiming that it had been in existence for several centuries. In addition to treating patients, the morgue also stores unidentified corpses that disappear from time to time. Rumor has it that they are going to play on the street. The idea struck him as both strange and alarming. The girl also mentioned that the head nurse had marked the hands of these corpses with a red mark so that they could be identified. The girl said with a sinister smile that she also had such a mark on her hand. She suddenly fell silent, noticing that there was no such mark on her own hand. However, upon seeing the number 117 on Ryan's hand, she immediately became furious and demanded that he tell her when he stole the sign. When the elevator doors opened, at least on the 4th floor, the girl suddenly panicked and began frantically pressing buttons, demanding that Ryan immediately close the doors, as if she felt that something terrible was lurking behind them. He couldn't understand what was making the pink-haired girl so nervous. She pressed the elevator button again and again, getting more and more angry and complaining that the door kept sticking. Muttering under her breath, she added that it was high time this was corrected. A figure suddenly appeared in the corridor. A zombie with a terrible face, with an exposed brain, who was slowly approaching them. The girl looked genuinely scared and was clearly nervous. The zombie suddenly rushed towards the open elevator, and the girl, despite all her desperate attempts, was unable to close the doors. Panic grew, and she screamed that a zombie was approaching. Just when it seemed like all was lost, the doors finally started to close, and she breathed a sigh of relief, thinking that they were safe after all. But Ryan suddenly stopped the doors and, calmly asking what she was doing, noticed that the zombies seemed to want to use the elevator too. He asked her how she would feel if someone missed an important meeting simply because the elevator left without them. The girl turned to him with a displeased expression and frowned. She thought to herself that there was clearly something wrong with this guy. In the end, all three of them ended up in the elevator together. They drove in silence until Ryan turned to the zombie and asked if he'd washed his hair yet. The zombie remained silent. When the elevator reached the second floor, the doors opened, and a girl who had fallen out of a wheelchair entered the elevator. She asked him to help her in, and when she was in the elevator, Ryan immediately turned to the girl and asked how she managed to wash herself while confined to a wheelchair. On the fourth floor, a young man stepped out of the elevator to help an elderly woman across the street. She thanked him for his kindness, remarking that he seemed very brave and emphasizing that such courageous young people always deserve respect, because the real heroes are those who help. However, when she looked inside the elevator, her jaw dropped in surprise, but she managed to notice it. A slightly confused zombie asked where she bought her jawbone and whether there was a dental clinic in this upside down. The pink-haired girl, unable to bear everything that was happening, exclaimed that she had had enough and threatened to eat this fool. At that moment, a demonic mouth began to open on his neck. She was about to attack him, but the zombie intervened, declaring that he had tolerated this guy's stupidity long enough and would now deal with it himself. The girl in the wheelchair, increasingly perplexed, asked him what kind of ridiculous conversation they were having, claiming that this guy was hers and wondering if they had any decency. At that moment, the old woman hit her with her cane, scolding her for her rude words and reminding her that it was unacceptable to speak so disrespectfully to elderly people. When the elevator finally reached the fourth floor, the zombie, without hiding his confidence, declared that he would be the first. This caused another quarrel between them, but at that moment, they did not notice that Ryan had quietly disappeared. He left silently while everyone was distracted. Earlier, while exploring room 1401, Ryan received a systemic clue that the secrets were creatures that cared only for themselves and never shared their prey. He compared them to wolves, fighting over a limited amount of food. He was prepared for a fight, but even so, he considered the actions of these secret agents to be rather stupid. Lifeless bodies lay under white sheets in the morgue. The atmosphere in the room was strangely calm, as if shrouded in darkness, devoid of the contemptuous glances and harsh voices that usually characterized such places. Ryan hadn't expected to see corpses here, especially ones that appeared to belong to his classmates. As he passes cabinets of bodies, he comes across a notebook with photographs and notes taken by the head nurse. The first entry, dated August 25th of an unspecified year, showed his enthusiasm for the upcoming first day of training. A nurse wrote about how, despite difficulties and challenges at work, she ultimately achieved her dream. In this post, she expressed her desire to become a doctor, like her professor, who inspired her passion for helping people. The second entry, from September 12th, was about a boy named Timmy who was hospitalized. The nurse described him as an adorable child from a small island who didn't shed a tear even when she gave him an injection. It reminded her of her own childhood. The third entry, dated March 28th, contained a photograph of a nurse with her face cruelly crossed out in red pen. The nurse wrote about receiving praise from her professor, who was pleased with her rapid progress and hoped she would one day take his place. She proudly noted that she deeply admired her professor and would not let him down. But in subsequent entries, her anxiety intensified significantly, and her words became increasingly fragmented. In one entry, she expressed doubts about why the teacher had betrayed her trust, wrote that no one had come to her aid, and that the teacher had become a terrible, dirty, and disgusting person to her. The final line revealed her dark desire for revenge. She vowed to kill all who had wronged her. Ryan was surprised to realize the depth of drama behind this mission. The system reported that the task was 99% complete, meaning it was close to completion. At that moment, completely unexpectedly, the system warned that the mission had entered nightmare mode. As darkness enveloped the space, it was announced that a killer from the past, who had existed 50 years ago, would appear in the game. It seemed that the very deadly round mentioned earlier was about to begin. Meanwhile, Ryan laughed, realizing the irony of the situation. He noticed that this unique, once-in-a-century death round had appeared just as he was entering this world. Despite all the risks associated with the increased danger of nightmare mode, he couldn't help but admit that the rewards for participating in this mode were significantly higher. The system then reported that the special mission had been converted to something called Last Man Standing. Ryan, cursing the system for its cruel sense of humor, couldn't believe that a mission 99% complete had suddenly changed. It seemed incredibly unfair. At that moment, the head nurse entered the morgue and asked him what he was doing there. Realizing he had been caught, Ryan instantly realized he didn't have time to explain. He didn't have time to think. He had to run. Just as she was about to run away, Ryan noticed something strange. The head nurse didn't rush after him. He wondered why she didn't arrest him, because it was completely unexpected. When the young man returned to the first floor in the elevator, he was immediately surrounded by his classmates, causing him to almost fall. They asked him, seemingly in unison, if he was okay. Ryan didn't understand why they were still there, why they hadn't gone home. Noticing his confusion, Kira explained that according to the monitors, he was heading to the morgue and everyone was very worried about him. She asked what they should do now. Ryan replied that he'd encountered a nurse downstairs, but to his surprise, she hadn't attacked him. He admitted he didn't know why, but warned that nightmare mode was no joke, especially for those who could no longer be resurrected. He strongly advised everyone to stop immediately and return. But his classmates didn't seem to listen to him. They insisted that if they completed the task, they would receive a much greater reward. Oscar turned to the class president, Damien, and asked him if he was crazy, adding that for newbies like them, nightmare mode was practically a death sentence, and wondered if Damien was really ready to die here. Then Damien looked down and admitted that he certainly didn't want to die, but he had no other choice. He took all their coins and was now obliged to pay them compensation upon their return. Oscar, recognizing Damien's determination, firmly stated that his own life was more important. He announced his intention to leave first and wished Ryan luck, then disappeared. Ryan was amazed by their persistence. He believed that life was given only once, and that if they died now, there would be no second chance. But then Kira and the class president suddenly fell to their knees in front of him, grabbed his legs, and looked at him with pleading eyes. Ryan eventually gave in, but only after warning them that if they died, it wouldn't be his fault. Meanwhile, in the morgue, the head nurse was completely delighted that the nightmare had finally begun. She was looking forward to this moment, as this mode was her favorite. The system indicated that the killer would begin stalking the participants at midnight. Time passed, but the corridors remained empty and silent. Ryan, Damien, and Kira huddled together and waited for the clock to strike midnight. Damien tried to calm them down, saying that if they stayed united, they would have a chance to survive. But suddenly the head nurse knocked on their door. She demanded that the door be opened for her. She also reminded the students that everyone must stay in their rooms at night and that sleeping together was strictly prohibited. When no one answered, the nurse became furious. Strange bone-like formations protruded from his back, making his appearance even more frightening. She burst into the room, smashing the door to pieces, and began laughing menacingly. His face became less human, his eye sockets turned black and his pupils turned red, and words came from his lips indicating that it was time to begin the game. Damien, without wasting a second, ordered his friends to run and immediately grabbed his sword, deciding to hold her back at least for a moment. He hoped that if he could hold on to the nanny, they would be able to escape. He urged them to leave without him, insisting that they had only one chance. Kira hesitated, not wanting to leave him alone, but Damien firmly told her that if she wanted to survive, she had to follow his instructions. The girl wondered what would happen to the president if they abandoned him. However, before she could say anything, she suddenly noticed that something had torn off her legs. Without thinking, Damien rushed forward, leaving her behind. He even managed to overtake Ryan, who was stunned by what was happening. Meanwhile, Kira was horrified. Until the very end, she did not believe that this was really happening. Turning around, Ryan noticed that the girl was still there and couldn't understand how Damien could have done such a thing. Kira began to remember all the time she spent with Damien and couldn't believe that he had betrayed her. Suddenly, an idea came to the hero's head and he screamed in panic at Kira to leave this world as soon as possible. The girl started writing something on the tablet, but before she could finish, the head nurse killed her. She continued to strike her blow after blow until the girl's body fell dead. Ryan saw everything, but he didn't waste time grieving. He felt genuinely sorry for the girl, but he knew perfectly well that he couldn't change anything. Meanwhile, the nurse was extremely unhappy that the other victims had managed to escape from her. A few minutes later, Ryan, deciding not to linger, climbed the stairs to the next floor, where he found Damien barely breathing. Noticing this, Damien turned and gently told Ryan not to question his behavior, explaining that everyone only cared about themselves and Ryan was no exception. Damien then began to open up about his past, admitting that when he was in high school his father was diagnosed with cancer and his mother quickly ran off with another man. His grandfather, who loved Damien very much, was so enraged by what was happening that he died suddenly of a heart attack, even after selling his property and borrowing money from everyone he knew. It was not enough to cover all the costs of his father's treatment. The disease proved fatal, and Damien's father was never able to leave the hospital. Damien said he couldn't stand by and watch his father die. This examination was his only chance to save him. After listening to him, Ryan said that Damien didn't need to justify himself and advised him to stop pretending that he had the hardest life. He mentioned that Kira would like to invite them all to her home for dinner if they managed to survive. Ryan also recalled Kira talking about the difficulties Damien faced and her determination to help him after the test. Ryan then turned away and continued up the stairs, believing that Damien was right. Everyone makes their own choices and must be prepared for the consequences. But he was sure of one thing: none of this concerned him personally, because he only cared about himself. When Ryan finally reached the roof, he found Lily already waiting for him. Hearing his footsteps, she turned around and a happy smile appeared on her face. She expressed her joy at the opportunity to play with him again, but Ryan gently stroked her head and apologized, saying that they wouldn't be able to play this time. Damien, who followed Ryan to the roof, was surprised to notice a child there. A moment later, the head nurse appeared in their field of vision. She smugly stated that she knew perfectly well that they would all end up on the roof. Ryan immediately realized that they would not be able to defeat the nurse, since the mission conditions strictly prohibited killing the killer. So the hero, without wasting any time, asked the nanny if she wanted to hear his story before they met their fate. He began to tell her about a very intelligent girl who lived a long time ago. She was kind, hardworking, and caring, and her biggest dream was to become a nurse to help others. She put in a lot of effort and eventually achieved her goal. Despite constant fatigue, she continued to love her job and won the trust of many people. But one day, she must have witnessed something terrible. Entering one of the patient's rooms, she noticed that her teacher was bullying the patient. Even though what she saw shook her to the core, she tried to stop it. At that moment, the teacher finally revealed his true nature and raped both girls. To silence the student, he offered her a promotion to head nurse, which must have been a shock to her. It was terribly sad that her dream had come true under such terrible circumstances. She really wanted to tell the truth to those around her, but alas, no one believed her. Instead, rumors began to spread that she had sold herself to get the job. The main character of this whole story was none other than the head nurse, Rebecca. Then, after a horrific incident, his colleagues began to openly insult him, and even more painfully, patients who trusted him began to avoid him and distance themselves from him. The nurse noted with regret that there was nothing good left in these people, and in the end she killed them all, firmly asserting that they deserved their fate and saw nothing shameful in becoming sinners, for, in her opinion, each of them deserved to be torn to pieces. When the heroine stated that her actions were completely justified, her expression suddenly changed, and she looked at the young man without anger. The man asked her why she was looking at him like that, noting that he himself was no saint. He replied that these people truly deserved their punishment, but she admitted that deep down inside her there was still a drop of kindness left. He pointed to a little girl, Sonia, who became for her a symbol of the same kindness. Then the man realized that the head nurse, the same ghostly nurse from the 14th floor, and the little girl were not separate beings, but different facets of the same person. At first, he was sure that Lily was the nanny's daughter, but now he began to understand that the other ghosts were actually afraid of the little girl because she embodied the remnants of the nanny's kindness and innocence. The nanny left all her kindness in the girl's heart, ensuring that she would forever remain on the roof, carrying within herself the light and purity that she herself had lost. The man began to doubt whether the nanny truly wanted to continue living with her curse. But Rebecca questioned his assumptions, saying that even if he was right, it didn't matter. She stated that she had been able to get out of this horror on her own without anyone's help, and firmly maintained that she did not need his sympathy or pity. She said that it was time to stop everything. She said that they would go to hell. Despite this, Ryan noted that he still had a hostage, reluctantly admitting his vulnerability. He added that if Lily were to get hurt, it would also affect Samantha. At that moment, Ryan turned around sharply and saw Damien, driven by the thirst for victory, strike the little girl with a sword.
Ryan, shocked by what had happened, rushed to the girl, not knowing how to help her and not understanding how Damien could do such a thing.
Meanwhile, Damien seemed pleased with his victory. This continued until the head nurse chopped off his head with one blow. His head rolled to the other side of the roof and his body fell to the ground dead. Before his death, Damien still did not understand why, despite all his efforts, this creature did not die. Rebecca ridiculed the group, calling them idiots for thinking they could defeat her. She coldly stated that she was tired of their stupid games and that it was over. At that moment, Lily intervened in the conversation, begging the nurse not to kill Ryan. She told him that in some ways she was right, that she was not a sinner, and neither were they. The people she killed were cursed, but that was long ago, in the past, and now it seemed that all of this had sunk into oblivion. Then Rebecca, unable to contain herself, exclaimed that not all darkness needs light, and that not all sinners necessarily need redemption. But Lily said that she was not talking about these people, but about themselves. These people paid for their lives, but Lily always felt that Rebecca was unhappy, and all because they felt the same way. Then the girl, looking at the nanny, said that she had kept her on the roof for many years, but it had not brought happiness to either of them. Lily explained that constantly waiting for the nurse to come out onto the roof was just a sign of her own suffering and pain. She told him that it was time for both of them to find peace, that their torment could not continue. The little girl ran up to the nurse and hugged her tightly, trying to convey her warmth to her. She said that this time they needed to rest a little. Then his body began to slowly dissolve into thin air. The nurse, shocked by this gesture, burst into tears, realizing that the girl had been unhappy all this time, and that they both could be freed from fear and pain. Ryan watched the scene from his perch on the edge of the roof. He was glad that everything had gone according to plan, despite Damien's prank, and now happiness and sadness would pass by themselves, for only the person himself could grant a sense of redemption. Suddenly, young Rebecca appeared before his eyes. Ryan watched calmly as the nurse disappeared into thin air, leaving this world. He completed his special task, but after searching his pocket, he realized that he had forgotten to give the girl his sneakers. He paused, thinking about her small stature and the fact that she now walked barefoot, and it upset him. His heart sank as he realized he might never see her again. The system then announced his individual result, assigning him an East rank, with his level increasing by 1 and his physical strength increasing by 5. As a reward, he received a burial urn. Among the gifts was also Samantha's medical kit. The final gift was a special blood-red mold that would make the piece identical to the other riddles. Ryan was overwhelmed by everything he had accomplished and felt that he could now return to the real world, leaving all those terrible events behind and with a clear conscience. However, as he was preparing to leave, something unexpected happened on the way back. The system reported the anomaly, noting that it was an unprecedented event. The system had no choice but to move the hero into an unknown space. Soon he found himself in a room that resembled a classroom. Meanwhile, in the classroom, sitting at his desk in the almost empty room, Oscar watched the proceedings thoughtfully. The school's principal, Goldwyn, a burly man with a thick mustache, approached him and asked if he was sure the mission had gone into nightmare mode. Oscar confirmed this without hesitation, explaining that when he left the Upside Down, only Ryan, Damien, and Laura remained. He added that if he had not fallen into the nightmare world, he would not have been able to leave it sooner. The director came to the conclusion that only one person had survived, as evidenced by a special device that lit up with a single green indicator. Oscar then suggested that the survivor was Ryan. A classmate sitting next to Oscar's desk doubted this and asked if he had gone mad with fear. He expressed doubts, believing that the lazy Ryan was incapable of surviving in such conditions. The principal slammed the table and demanded an end to the argument, reminding everyone that whoever completed this program would bring pride to their school. At that moment, Victoria stood at the office door and silently watched what was happening. She was thinking about Ryan and his terrible diet. Meanwhile, Ryan found himself near a strange place called the Sky Prison. He wondered why he had been transferred here and whether he had even wanted this outcome. The heavy door opened of its own accord, and Ryan, after a slight hesitation, entered the dark room. Inside, the walls were lit by torches, creating an eerily bright and, at the same time, strange atmosphere. The system accepted him into the heavenly prison as a subordinate, informing him that everything was now under its control. Suddenly, the hero noticed a magical flash in front of him. He focused on his feelings and realized that here he felt absolutely everything. In this prison, everything was under his control, which meant that it was not just a dream, but a real place. However, despite this statement, Ryan realized that this place was dirty and unpleasant. As he continued his exploration, he noticed strange movements coming from underground, as if something was hiding underneath. He ended up in a strange room. Pulling back the curtain of chains, he discovered someone's legs shackled with heavy old chains. Looking up, he expected to see a beautiful girl. But instead, he encountered a dark, headless spirit. Cold and sinister, it was a girl named Celeste, but she had no head. The system explained that increasing her empathy level would help her better control this spirit and possibly acquire some of its abilities. But it turned out that her sympathy level was 0, but raising this level would allow Ryan to better control her and give her a chance to adopt some of his abilities. The hero didn't understand how secret it was, but he was haunted by the feeling that she was under the same pressure as the head nurse. He turned to the girl and asked if she wanted something to eat, but the feeling of tension only grew, and Ryan didn't know what to do. He started circling Olivia and asking her what drinks she liked and what kind of men she liked. Finally, he asked her if she would like to take a little walk with him. Hearing this, Celeste seemed to be both confused and happy at the same time. She told him that someone had stolen her beautiful head, and so now she had to get out of here and find it. Ryan extended his hand to her and said that if she listened to him, he would help her come to her senses. He noticed that the level of empathy had increased, and since he was acting out scenes from novels, communicating with Olivia came easily to him. But the girl became very angry when she realized that Ryan wanted her to obey him. She called him a worthless man and said that she only needed to lift a finger to subdue him, after which she summoned magical chains. But in an instant they cracked, which confused Olivia. In response to this, the heroine simply grinned and said that she did not understand the situation she found herself in. He took out a scroll and told her that he didn't care whether she loved him or not, but first they would make a contract, and then they would talk. He abandoned the contract and told her that she only had 2 options. She could sign the contract and become his subordinate. Otherwise, she may refuse and die. The girl silently unrolled the parchment and began to read. The first 2 paragraphs stated that she had no right to harm Ryan and was obliged to look after his safety first. These conditions also required her to love him wholeheartedly, cook for him, clean, and care for his physical and psychological well-being. She was also tasked with helping Ryan solve mysteries. Celeste continued reading and became furious. She couldn't understand how Ryan could make such demands. For example, to take care of him when he was sad or bored. Celeste declared that she would rather die than fulfill such conditions and tried to tear the parchment into pieces. However, when she noticed a sentence in the text asking Ryan to help her get her head back in place, she stopped. Meanwhile, in the real world, several students were sitting in the classroom while the principal and teachers were discussing something important. Suddenly, someone began to materialize in the corridor between the offices. Ryan, unable to hide his joy, eventually returned. The students were shocked, and the teachers and principal looked at him with disbelief. They recognized their student, Ryan. Oscar, for his part, was delighted, declaring that Ryan had indeed completed the task, while another student in the background turned pale, not understanding how this was possible. School staff surrounded Ryan. The principal offered him tea, and a teacher offered to examine him. Ryan was confused and didn't understand what was happening, but the teacher noted that she had seen great potential in him from the very beginning. The principal announced with confidence that Ryan had successfully completed the nightmare program and had become the best student in the school. He urged him to accept the praise he deserved. Ryan replied that it didn't bother him at all, even though the tea in his hand was scalding hot. The teacher shook her head in disapproval and sternly reprimanded the headmistress for not cooling the tea beforehand. In response, the headmistress abruptly dropped the cup and ordered the teacher to remove it so Ryan wouldn't burn himself. Just then, someone called Ryan's name. He turned towards the sound and frowned when he saw a pink-haired girl standing in the doorway. She placed her hand on his waist and, with feigned calm, asked if they could talk alone. Ryan immediately recognized her as Victoria, the famous school beauty, and was surprised to see her approach him. He suggested that perhaps his aura as the protagonist had been activated, causing the girl to suddenly fall in love with him. As the sun set and evening shadows fell, Victoria and Ryan stood on the school balcony overlooking the courtyard. Smiling, she congratulated him on successfully completing the task and surviving the terrible nightmare. But Ryan decided not to reveal any information about Olivia to her. He told Victoria that she had impressed him even more because of the fictitious contract she had signed. Victoria, smiling, did not quite understand what he meant. She suggested that Ryan might also have signed a secret contract, as that was the only explanation for the mysterious deaths of so many classmates. Celeste warned that achieving lofty goals often requires sacrificing one's pride. At that moment, the hero realized that he had made a mistake. Victoria, looking at him with interest, asked how many items he considered necessary in exchange for signing the contract. This question confused Ryan, and he didn't know how to answer it correctly. At that moment, Victoria's own spirit appeared behind her, blaming Ryan for the death of her classmates. She warned him not to try to lie because she was personally involved in the deaths of 13 classmates. Celeste, standing next to Ryan, explained that revealing secrets never did any good, and she thought Ryan was lucky that she treated him that way. Ryan suddenly realized that the deaths of his classmates were part of the sacrifice made to fulfill the contract. Victoria, noticing his confusion, tried to calm him down and showed him the app on her phone. She offered to exchange contracts, explaining that they were the only ones in the world who had entered into such agreements. Soon the clock struck 5 p.m. At that moment, the secret trial in the world of Goldwyn School came to an end. Parents of the students gathered in the schoolyard, anxiously awaiting the authorities' announcement of the list of those killed in this tragedy. Of the 31 participants, only 3 survived. Ryan realized that dealing with Victoria would not be easy. After some deliberation, Celeste suggested killing her, but Ryan decided that this would be too drastic a measure. He explained to Olivia that frequent killings could harm her beauty, and she probably agreed. Celeste promised to follow her desires in the real world, but in the Upside Down, she decided to go her own way. Ryan felt relieved that he had been able to influence her decision. At that moment, a woman stood nearby, loudly sobbing and mourning the death of her child. The fair-haired woman and her husband cried out in grief. Among them stood a bald man in a wheelchair, and suddenly he called out to Ryan. The dead girl's father angrily demanded that his daughter be returned to him, and a security guard intervened, trying to calm the man down. Ryan looked at him with sympathy and felt that Celeste was asking him if he really felt sorry for this man. Ryan responded that he felt sympathy because the victims were truly dead and would not be resurrected. He added that although the students were forced to participate in the test, they were not prevented from leaving of their own free will. After all, the decision to stay was theirs, and they chose this path themselves. When he finally reached the parking lot, someone called out to him. The girl, letting out a desperate cry, stated that she was shouting at the guy in a hoarse voice, trying to get his attention. Ryan recognized her as his sister Jessica and explained that he had been thinking about the same test. Her sister gently stroked her hair, smiled, and said that it was time for them to go home, promising to cook her favorite dish, spicy pork. There was joy in her voice that he was doing well, but she also noted that with his grades he wouldn't be able to get into university. Nina also mentioned that she had already found a job for him. Celeste, noticing their conversation, leaned over them angrily, not hiding her irritation, and asked why Ryan's sister wouldn't let him return to the Upside Down. Celeste declared that as soon as she came to her senses, she would punish her sister. Ryan, alarmed by her threats, intervened, warning Olivia not to harm her sister. Nina, confused, asked what was going on with Ryan. He reassured her that everything was fine and gently pushed Olivia away, who remained invisible to everyone. Ryan believed that perhaps he had passed the test, survived the nightmare mode, and even completed a secret mission. His sister, looking at him skeptically, rolled her eyes and, with some irritation, told him not to play the hero, not to take risks, and not to break himself. She added that he didn't need to put on a show for her because she knew perfectly well what he was really capable of. Nina then mentioned that she needed to find him an outfit for the ball, and reiterated that now that she had found him a job at the factory, he should stay away from the Upside Down. The graduation ceremony soon began, and the students gathered in the spacious hall. Ryan, thinking about the future, decided that working in a factory was not his dream, and intended to earn money in another way. Winning the exam significantly improved his grades, and he hoped that he would eventually be praised and respected, but it turned out that the school was hiding the grades of all students. Suddenly, someone asked Ryan to sit next to him. Victoria looked worried and anxious as she approached Ryan. Ryan, surprised by her presence, asked her why she chose to sit with the third-year group instead of her sophomore group. Then, with a grim expression, Celeste advised Ryan not to let Victoria distract him and warned him that strange things were happening in the hallway. Ryan, suspiciously asking what was going on, became seriously concerned. Then Victoria, frowning, pointed to the scene of the incident and said that something strange was happening there. Ryan looked up and noticed the school principal standing behind the podium, giving a speech. The director looked strange, as if he was not himself, as if there was something wrong with his head. Suddenly, as if on cue, the lights in the room went out and blood began to flow out of nowhere onto the microphone. Ryan turned pale and looked up in fear. The other students, shocked by what was happening, opened their mouths and screamed, clutching the armrests of their chairs with their fingers. Numerous shadows appeared above the director, surrounded by barbed wire, looming ominously over him and making the situation even worse. One of the shadows suddenly descended from the sky, and, looking at the director with a predatory look, began to slowly approach. At that moment, one of the students, overcome with panic, couldn't contain himself and let out a terrified scream, breaking the deathly silence that reigned in the room. This scream caused chaos as the students rushed for the exits in panic, some desperately searching for their teachers, trying to understand what was happening. Suddenly, someone from the crowd whispered that honorary medals and diplomas were worthless if the students did not learn from what had happened. It was at that moment that Squad 3033 arrived, and Marcus, standing before everyone, declared that the chaos that had occurred was merely a manifestation of the spirit living within him. The students paled when they realized who stood before them. Marcus, with the air of a stern professor, scolded them for their reckless behavior and turned his attention to the room. He instantly recognized one of the students and realized that this was the very man the authorities had talked so much about. At that moment, Ryan sat quietly, oblivious to the goings-on around him. His behavior caught the attention of a scarred man who watched him closely. The man himself recognized that Ryan was truly an extraordinary young man. Marcus gave him an approving grin. Ryan was surprised to see the man staring at him and, slightly embarrassed, didn't know what to think. Victoria then leaned over and whispered that the man was from the department and had come here in person. Ryan, still confused, asked how secret their presence was. Victoria explained that universities deliberately create excitement around student admissions to gauge young people's reaction to such unusual events. She added that the Bureau of Curiosities, a government agency, was making its debut at the graduation ceremony, which in itself is an exceptional event. As the tension in the room grew, Ryan began to sense that something big was about to happen. Celeste, noticing his distrust, asked if she should attack the man who seemed to frighten Ryan, but Ryan, confidently declaring that he was afraid of no one, immediately refused. Celeste, in turn, offered to take care of this man, adding that the spirit in him was only at the 4th level and that it would be easy to befriend him or defeat him. But Ryan reminded her that assaulting a government official was illegal and that he had no intention of going to jail for something thoughtless, and Celeste dismissed her concerns as trivial and insignificant. Marcus, in turn, demanded silence and, as if summing up what was happening, declared that he would not tolerate any more interruptions. He told the students about the horrific events in the history of the Inside Out. The man mentions the disappearance of 3,214 mountain dwellers whose skins were used to make clothing. He also recalled the mass murder of 144 people committed by a clown at an amusement park. He explained that even if humans could enter the Upside Down, beings from that world could also enter the real world, thereby disrupting the normal order of things. In this context, he emphasized the importance of fulfilling all the tasks of the Inside Out and implementing them fully. Marcus then announced his intention to conduct another test. He informed the students that those who did not wish to continue participating could leave the room immediately. For those who remain, he will personally take the oath on behalf of the Bureau of Curiosities. The students listened attentively to the man's words. Students who successfully complete the assignment will be admitted to Tsinghua University in the capital. Participants who deserve special attention will receive additional rewards and the opportunity to become associate members of the authority. Besides this, he promised other rewards. As students began to leave their seats in anger, Ryan remained seated. His hand shook as he tried to stand up, but he silently begged Olivia to let him go, insisting that he didn't want to take part in the trials and needed to rest after everything he had been through earlier. Celeste, reminding him of his promise to find the head, declared that he must return to the Upside Down. Ryan insisted that she had no right to control her own body and that she was contractually obligated to obey his will. Celeste, in turn, countered that he had agreed to meet her face to face and that the terms of the contract did not cancel that promise. He promised her punishment, and despite his resolve, there was a troubling threat in his voice. Celeste, without losing her composure, replied that if she died, anyone involved in this process would not only go mad, but also be paralyzed or, even more terrifying, instantly follow her into death. At that moment, Ryan felt a cold weight settle over him, wondering why the instructions he had read hadn't mentioned such deadly risks. Marcus, for his part, continued his speech, congratulating the other participants in the trial and announcing that each of them would receive 200,000 crowns, adding that he would personally hand over the money to the guardians. Then, taking out the device for traveling to the Upside Down, Marcus announced that it was time to begin. Ryan, in tears, desperately tried to get up and rise from his seat, begging Olivia to let him go, but she only watched silently as the countdown began. Marcus wished everyone good luck, and the system, as if trying to calm them down, advised the students to improve their relationships with teachers and classmates as soon as possible. The third-level task began when the students entered the classroom, where the lesson was already in progress. The professor greeted them with a smile, invited them in, and immediately closed the doors behind him. The task was quite clear: pass the final exam at the School of the Bonebreaker in 5 days, with the first 2 days being mandatory and leaving the school was strictly prohibited. Everything became clear. The man from the department had clearly deceived them. The teacher invited the students to greet the new arrivals and first asked one of the newcomers, Felix, to introduce himself. The young man confidently introduced himself as Felix, an 18-year-old boy, and stated that he loved singing, rapping, playing basketball, and eating chicken. So he finished his speech and headed to his seat. Ryan couldn't shake the feeling that it was all too easy. Felix, beaming with happiness, headed to his place, but the professor, seeing him, grinned predatorily and, in the blink of an eye, with a quick movement, crushed Felix's head. Ryan paled as he realized the danger this school posed and turned to Olivia in fear, asking her why they were so obsessed with heads. He begged her to take care of the professor, but Celeste calmly replied that she had spent all her strength on controlling her body and now she needed to recover. Disappointed, Ryan realized she was deliberately making up excuses. At that moment, the system gave a hint, suggesting that the professor might be looking for someone interesting to liven up his monotonous life. Ryan, not wanting to waste any time, decided to go over and introduce himself. He proudly stated that he was 18 years old, had a good understanding of urban survival, and knew how to use smartphones with ease. He added that his close friends call him Ryan, while his classmates might call him Cool. Suddenly, Ryan ripped off his jacket and shouted his name, attracting the attention of all the students. Puzzled students began to reluctantly call it Cool. The hero continued to shout his name nonstop, taking off his shirt and causing several students to burst into cheers. Ryan, not missing the opportunity, shouted his name and took off his turtleneck. The students began to applaud in amazement and jumped up from their seats. When the hero was about to take off his pants, the professor, clearly not wanting to risk getting a reprimand from the director, stopped him, ordering him to get dressed and return to his place. Ryan, in turn, was pleased with the successful completion of the test and his results. But the professor quickly restored order and, inviting Victoria to his place, asked her to introduce herself. Victoria confidently stepped forward and, with one blow, forcefully hit the professor's head on the table. Then, introducing herself as a 6-year-old girl who loved to kick buildings, she declared that everyone should be afraid of her. The professor, barely containing his excitement, stuck his head out from behind the table and congratulated Victoria on her confidence, inviting her to sit in his place. He called Felix over to introduce himself again, and, not being particularly inventive, Felix repeated his introduction, adding, bizarrely, that he liked to eat straight from the toilet. The professor, unaware of what was happening, announced that since the principal had interrupted the English teacher, he would now conduct the lesson directly in the classroom. He urged the students to listen carefully, hoping that the school board would not punish him for poor teaching. Ryan thought the Upside Down was so modern that it even had English lessons, which he found quite quirky but also funny. Meanwhile, in the canteen, the students were having lunch and a lively atmosphere reigned among them. Some discussed their current situation. One student mentioned that he had lost the ability to resurrect. Another student complained that his classmates were using his head as a ball for games. Ryan, watching these conversations, laughed and remarked that with methods such as breaking hands for incorrect answers, he would become a genius very soon. Lenny suggested that all 5 of them work together, share information, and help each other. Bruno agrees, noting that teamwork can greatly improve efficiency. Victoria, however, noted that there was nothing much to discuss at the moment, but added that living together would facilitate communication and mutual care. Ryan was encouraged and grinned when he saw that boys and girls would now be living together in the dorm, which was also good news. As night fell, the lights went out in some dormitory rooms. Ryan stood in his room, looking at the pink bedding and girly clothes scattered around the room. He couldn't hold back his tears, feeling how happiness filled his heart, and, thanking the gods, he mentally thanked them for the opportunity to spend the night next to the girl he had dreamed of for so long. Suddenly, breaking the silence, someone appeared behind him. Ryan jumped and turned around quickly to see a man who introduced himself and began explaining the dorm rules. The man reported that the lights in the bedroom were turned off at 9 p.m. when the curfew began. He stressed that entry into the old dormitory is strictly prohibited. He also explained that due to limited space in the dormitory, boys and girls are housed together. but he added that pregnancy is strictly prohibited by these rules. The man mentioned his role as a commander, saying he installed cameras in the rooms for security purposes. Looking at him, Ryan realized with disgust that this man was a pervert. The man didn't notice a note on the table written by a girl named Stella. In the note, she offered him snacks, but invited him to find her if he wanted to meet her. Celeste, noticing him looking at the note, remarked that Stella was a level 6 and easy to deal with. Ryan, surprised, asked how Celeste had recovered so quickly. She replied that she did it for his own good, so that he would learn to solve his problems on his own. While searching for the treats mentioned in the note, Ryan discovered a stash of chocolate bars, chips, and cookies, deciding that a cola would be the perfect complement to his evening. He realized that he would have to rely on his roommate for food for the next few days, and Celeste, noticing his preoccupation with finding food, accused him of deliberately ignoring her. Meanwhile, Ryan decided to check his character information. He discovered that he was at level 1, with 105 magic power, with each level up granting him an additional 5 power. He realized that understanding control techniques might be more important than using brute force, and decided to focus on improving his skills. He ordered the urn opened, and upon lifting the lid found inside a butterfly-shaped hairpin, an old-fashioned magazine, and a pass to the black market. Ryan looked at the magazine with disgust, remembering his real, pretty neighbor. At that moment, Celeste called out to him, handed him her pass, and urged him to come with her. She explained that this pass allowed him to move freely around the dormitories. Ryan was puzzled, unsure why they needed to go for a walk. Celeste, noticing his confusion, suggested they search for his head, but Ryan suddenly sensed a change in her tone. She insisted that he was obsessing over little things and repeated that they needed to go for a walk. Ryan, after thinking for a moment, replied that he would first look for his head, but not right away, because he wanted to finish the main thing. Celeste asked him, somewhat reluctantly, what could be more important than his head at the moment. As soon as she said this, the light in the dormitory corridor suddenly went out. Soon the door to the protagonist's room creaked open. Ryan stepped out carefully, knowing he had to move as quietly as possible to avoid meeting the commander. Suddenly, a familiar voice was heard behind him. It was Victoria, asking why Ryan wasn't sleeping either. Frightened, Ryan flinched and cried out in surprise, but quickly came to his senses and curiously asked why she wasn't sleeping. He hoped his shout hadn't woken the others, and immediately added a question about why she'd left the commander's room. Victoria, with a slight smile, dismissed his assumptions, assuring him that the commander wouldn't wake until morning. She explained that she intended to inspect a locked dorm room and invited Ryan to join her. Celeste, seeing that Ryan was about to follow Victoria, immediately warned him to stay away from her, noting that no one would notice if something happened to him. Ryan, although with some hesitation, nevertheless agreed to accompany Victoria to the closed dormitory. Celeste, slightly puzzled by this turn of events, expressed her bewilderment, but Victoria insisted, declaring that she knew where the old dormitory was and offering to show her the way. Ryan was intrigued, wondering how she had managed to get past the commander, and Celeste, still worried, was outraged that he had ignored her warnings. Ryan, deciding that simply wandering around the area was pointless, came to the conclusion that it would be better to look around the old dormitory. He remembered that the closure of this hotel was probably connected with an important secret and decided to find out the details. When they ventured into the abandoned dormitory, they found themselves faced with dark corridors infested with rats. The windows were littered with broken glass, and the ceiling was riddled with holes. Ryan followed Victoria, his anxiety growing with each passing minute. Victoria then looked around the room and noticed that the building had 6 floors and suggested splitting up to cover a larger area more quickly. In response, Ryan cited horror movie conventions, which suggested staying together would be much safer. Victoria gave in and agreed to explore the place together. Ryan then began to suspect that Victoria had ulterior motives as she grew closer to him, and Celeste also noticed that she was clearly up to something. Victoria began to examine the rooms one by one, reading an old newspaper, while Ryan, watching her carefully, examined the cabinets. He didn't trust her intentions, but he didn't drive her crazy, hoping to better understand what she was doing. Finally, Victoria, as if summing it up, announced that there was nothing interesting on the first floor and suggested moving on to the next one. The water flowed continuously from the faucet, creating a calm and soothing sound as they explored the dark and abandoned corridors. Victoria looked around carefully, trying not to miss a single detail, while Ryan searched for something on the top shelf, trying to find something useful. They soon reached the next floor, and Ryan, feeling tired, asked Victoria how much further they had to go. When they finally reached the 6th floor, Ryan felt an incredible sense of relief. The stairs had disappeared, and only one last obstacle remained. Celeste, always wary, warned him to be careful, noting that there was a strong, ominous energy present on this floor. Ryan immediately noticed that the floor was unusually clean compared to the other floors, where there were shards of glass and rats running around. This led him to believe that some evidence might have been deliberately hidden. When Victoria approached the door and turned the handle, she found that the door was locked. She shrugged and informed Ryan that this was the last room in the dorm, room 614. And at that very moment, the bell suddenly rang, and Victoria frowned. Ryan looked around suspiciously and noticed a girl standing there, smiling widely as if she knew what was going on. Suddenly, without warning, the floor lamps flashed red, and the air filled with the sound of doorknobs turning. From inside the rooms came a loud banging sound, as if something was trying to break out. Victoria quickly assessed the situation and realized it was a trap, and immediately shouted at Ryan to run. Despite all her attempts to stop him, she rushed forward in terror. At that moment, shadows resembling human hands burst out of the room, causing the door to jump off its hinges. Creatures consisting of many arms began to appear from other rooms and break down their doors with terrifying force. Suddenly, the hero realized that the creature's attacks could not reach him. Celeste, like a ghost, materialized in front of the barefoot Ryan and immediately took physical form, deciding to help him escape. Ryan was amazed by his ability to transform, and his surprise knew no bounds. Celeste tried to persuade him to run away, explaining that there were too many shadows and it was impossible to fight them. She noticed that these shadows were only now beginning to appear on the 6th floor, which suggested that there was a hidden reason for this phenomenon. As the crowd of hands approached, Celeste summoned chains to hold them back as long as possible, giving them a chance to escape. Apparently, the ghost girl wanted to sacrifice herself to save the main character. Without thinking, Ryan grabbed her hand and pulled her along with him, not letting her stay behind. Despite her confusion and disorientation, Celeste followed him into the hidden room, hoping that this place would help them escape from these creatures. When they were finally safe inside, Celeste became angry at Ryan for not letting her distract the creatures and asked him why he remained silent. She insisted that he find a way out as soon as possible, otherwise they would both die here, alone. But the hero realized that this was not the most important thing now. Ryan, trying to calm her down, turned to the window where a girl in a long blue skirt was standing. Celeste, suddenly realizing that Ryan was silent for some reason, eventually realized that it was because the girl was not just an ordinary inhabitant of this world. The girl began to speak, complaining that she and her lover were separated by endless mountains and seas. She expressed hope that love could overcome such obstacles. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she dreamed of one day conquering the world with the power of her love. As Celeste listened to these words, she reflected on the importance of intuition, and the young girl glowed in the soft moonlight. Ryan looked at her, unable to decide whether she was a ghost or an ordinary soul inhabiting this strange world. Suddenly, the system told her that she was about to see a sky full of stars, but then it suddenly burst into flames, engulfing everything around her. Celeste suddenly called out to Ryan, abruptly interrupting his thoughts. She insistently urged him to stop thinking about trivial matters, as the situation demanded his full attention. At that moment, they began to break down the door from the outside, but Celeste, without losing her composure, held it tightly. Ryan, wasting no time, grabbed the strange girl by the hand and insisted that they run away immediately. But just as he was shouting at Olivia to stop for a moment, the hand he was holding suddenly turned into a swarm of butterflies. As if on cue, the system informed him of the start of the mission, cryptically declaring that gossip can be more terrible than any weapon. The girl, transformed into a cloud of butterflies, flew effortlessly out the window, symbolizing the beginning of her mission. At that moment, dark hands rushed through the door like a whirlwind, splitting the wood. Celeste, frightened, reacted quickly, declaring they had no time at all, insisting they leave immediately. She grabbed Ryan by the collar and pulled him along with her. Jumping onto the windowsill, she hugged him tightly and told him to hold on as tight as he could. Then Ryan, slightly annoyed, objected, saying it was too early for him to die, especially with Victoria. Hearing the noise, Victoria turned around and frowned when she saw Ryan in Olivia's arms as they jumped out of the window. Several ghostly hands began to haunt them, leaving them no peace. Ryan screamed in fear as they flew through the air, his hair flying in the wind and his face twisted into a mask of terror. But Celeste fell hard, and Ryan, stunned, threw his head back, feeling very nauseous. He barely restrained himself from vomiting, pressing his lips tightly together. Celeste seemed pleased with the result. Ryan, hunched over the asphalt, couldn't help but vomit, wiping his mouth. He noticed that the escape had been far more exciting than any ride. Victoria, handing him a handkerchief, asked how he was feeling, and also why he had not listened to her and ran away earlier when she told him to. Ryan then tried to justify himself by explaining that he had rushed to the toilets, but she had already run away too fast, and he had not had time to catch up with her. Victoria looked at his face thoughtfully, then her expression darkened. She asked him if he had found the clue, or perhaps completed the task. Ryan, surprised by the accuracy of her question, tried to deflect the answer by asking her to guess. But she wouldn't let him get away with it and insisted that he stop joking, to which he eventually admitted that he had an idea, but insisted that they get some sleep before continuing. Having returned the handkerchief to her, he quickly left. Victoria continued to watch him walk away, muttering to herself, thinking that 100,000 crowns would be enough to buy him the key to solving the mystery. Upon hearing this, Ryan objected that he was not for sale and that all money had to be earned honestly. In response, she offered 200,000 crowns. Ryan hesitated for a moment, then asked if she was trying to take the task away from him. She responded by asking if his monthly budget was not enough for him and offered to make a deal. Ryan then reluctantly admitted that the clue was indeed in room 614, a photograph of a beautiful, large-breasted girl, but warned her about the tentacles that had filled the entire building. After listening to him, Victoria noted that even if he had managed to get out, it would not have been difficult for him, but she doubted his determination if he was so afraid. Then Ryan replied with bitterness in his voice that the one who said the same thing had now been grieving for 7 days. Saying that he needed to rest and did not want to disturb her, he left, suggesting to meet tomorrow. Victoria's secret ally, watching her with restraint, asked why she had not sacrificed Ryan for her own good, reminding her of the strict terms of their contract, which seemed to leave no room for doubt or hesitation. Victoria, without thinking twice, replied that such an opportunity would soon present itself and that she intended to hand the boy over to his father for further investigation. But the mysterious figure expressed doubts about her apparent generosity, questioning the girl's true intentions. Victoria, without hiding it, admitted that she had in fact cheated on him, stating that she did not even have the means to support herself. She was sure that the mere thought of wealth would quench her thirst. But it turned out that Ryan had overheard their conversation. He soon returned home and slept there until nightfall. As the clock struck nearly 9 a.m., Ryan asked Olivia how long he'd slept. She wasted no time in replying that there were only 5 minutes left before class started. Panicked, Ryan immediately stood up and, without hiding his agitation, demanded an explanation as to why she had not woken him up earlier. Celeste calmly explained that she tried to wake him up, but he was sleeping so soundly that he didn't want to wake up. Quickly getting dressed and throwing his backpack over his shoulder, he rushed down the corridor and hurried to class. Ryan burst into the classroom and loudly apologized for being late. Felix then greeted him warmly, explaining that he had spent the first part of the lesson alone without a teacher. Ryan breathed a sigh of relief, glad that he hadn't been punished too harshly. Sitting down at the table, he noticed that Victoria's table was empty. An alarming thought came over her. Had she really entered the room alone? He began to fear that he was responsible for her disappearance, or worse, her death. Meanwhile, several students were flirting in front of him, and the thought that gossip is more dangerous than weapons came to him again. He relied on how one person's obsessive thoughts or actions could influence another. He leaned toward Patty and, trying to hide his concern, asked her if she knew anything about the student who lived in room 614. She picked her nose casually and warned him not to interfere with the affairs of room 614 unless he wanted to get into trouble. Ryan realized that everything in this world was shrouded in mystery and that a real investigation awaited him. Suddenly, a loud scraping of chairs was heard in the classroom. Ryan turned around sharply and noticed with horror that all of his classmates were looking at him with expressions of fear and surprise on their faces. Celeste was surprised to see that Ryan managed to capture the attention of the entire audience. A second later, Ryan was overcome with panic, believing he was trapped. His heart began to beat faster as Patty arched her neck unnaturally and leaned toward him, asking if he had any more questions. Panicked, Ryan told him to stay away and tried to think of what to say. At that moment, the teacher entered the classroom holding a red notebook in her hands. Ryan took advantage of the moment to shout for everyone to greet the professor. The disappointed students remained silent, lacking the necessary enthusiasm. Finally, the students stood up and greeted the teacher. The woman looked carefully at the class and the students. Ryan assumed that they all went to school and pretended to be sick, so he decided to boss his classmates around a little. The teacher announced with a slight sense of satisfaction that the class had behaved well and that she was now going to conduct their favorite experiment. Ryan believed that these mysteries were now beginning to interfere with science, which posed a threat to human civilization. From under her sweater, she took out a bottle of green liquid. She also asked 2 students to help her conduct the experiment. Ryan's heart sank. This was a bad sign. The teacher announced that the class president and the student who had invited everyone to say hello to her would be helping with the experiment, and Ryan paled, realizing he had just signed his own death warrant. The professor handed the test tube to the class leader, asking him to describe in detail his feelings after drinking the contents. Without the slightest hesitation, the class monitor drank the green liquid, and immediately afterwards, the test tube fell to the floor and broke. At that moment, the president's flesh began to peel off as if it were simply liquid. He said he felt a little strange when the liquid in the test tube began to melt and was surprised to discover that it had a sweet and sour taste. The professor, who looked pleased but also critical, immediately pointed out that the taste was not suitable for the experiment and added that the formula needed significant revision. She then turned her attention to Ryan and asked if he wanted to try the contents of the test tube. Ryan, though somewhat nervous, took the test tube curiously, his face illuminated by the clear, bubbling liquid with bluish vapors emanating from it. Wrinkling his nose in disgust, he leaned back, not knowing what to do next. The teacher leaned over him with a threatening expression and asked why he was starting to drink so slowly. Then Ryan, unable to contain himself, joked that it was impossible to resist the urge to drink what the teacher takes straight from her bra. He added that using something so valuable to someone like him would be a waste. He smelled the faint scent of the professor's perfume coming from the bottle and declared that the other students deserved the right to taste the contents. Without thinking twice, Ryan grabbed the nearest student and forced him to drink the contents of the test tube, declaring that he could not deprive others of such a pleasure. The teacher was shocked to see her student melt after drinking the liquid. Shocked, she eventually admitted that the chance should have been given to someone who was more determined to do it, and congratulated Ryan, advising the other students to follow his example. The professor then ordered everyone to take their seats, thus indicating that the lesson had begun. Meanwhile, Ryan was literally starving, unable to satisfy his hunger with the snacks from his roommate's box and desperately longing for real food. Suddenly, a plaintive groan caught his attention, and surprised, he leaned over to see where the noise was coming from. In real life, a group of school children sat at a table, clearly suffering from hunger, their stomachs growling loudly. Victoria, without showing any particular emotion, noted that the man would not die of hunger in a few days. She approached their table as if she didn't notice the seriousness of the situation. The girl added that as part of the experiment, they could go without food for 5 days, but immediately emphasized that she could not allow herself to eat human organs. Ryan frowned, not sure if she was joking or serious. Victoria, noticing his bewilderment, concluded that he didn't seem particularly hungry. Ryan replied that he had been accustomed to hunger since childhood. Jan, observing the situation, noticed that fasting for 5 days was easier said than done. Even if they had survived, he added, their bodily functions would have been seriously impaired. Victoria explained that their fear of eating in the cafeteria had led them to avoid the food. She insisted that the food didn't actually taste terrible, though some of those present might disagree. Jan, weary of everything that was happening, noted that it was only the second day of the trial and expressed relief at the imminent opportunity to leave. But he admitted that he had no information about the current mission and stood up to leave. Bruno tried to stop him, offering to discuss everything, but Lenny was not in the mood to talk. Felix, who joined them, said he missed his mother's unique cooking. Meanwhile, Ryan watched his classmates leave. Victoria looked at the guy, found him unreliable, and suggested that he work more closely with Ryan, hoping that their joint efforts would bring better results. Suddenly, Celeste warned Ryan to be careful. She stated that although Victoria and her spirit appear friendly, they actually hide sinister intentions. She strongly advised him to avoid them. Ryan, in turn, noted that it was still too early for him to fall in love and added that, in addition, he had not yet achieved financial independence. He also noted that he and Victoria had the same lead and offered to discuss next steps once Victoria revealed her true intentions. When Victoria started talking about money, Ryan pretended not to understand. Irritated by his indifference, Victoria muttered that in that case it was every man for himself. Ryan wasted no time in leaving the room, and Celeste was glad to see Victoria so angry. She turned to Ryan and told him he had done the right thing by moving as far away as possible. Ryan then agreed with her words and admitted that he did not understand why Victoria was showing such hostility towards him. Moreover, she did not show up for classes, but the teachers did not react to this in any way. Celeste then suggested that he explore the area at night, hoping it would help him progress in the trials. But Ryan replied that they were not going on a reconnaissance mission, but were doing something else. He announced that it was time to take a walk outside the school. Hearing this, Celeste, full of joy and enthusiasm, jumped with happiness. As they were about to leave, the system suddenly alerted Ryan that he had left the testing area and noted that he only had one resurrection left. At that moment, the system froze, and Celeste couldn't help but laugh, noticing that Ryan's clothes were too small for him and clearly feminine. This blood-red uniform made him indistinguishable from the mysterious figures. Then Celeste hugged Ryan, still laughing. Ryan asked her to be quiet, reminding her that he was doing all this for her and begged her to protect him. Celeste assured him she would do it with her life, then asked if he had money for a taxi. Ryan frowned, finding the question awkward. Celeste then offered to pay him double, but Ryan firmly stated that he would get the money himself and should not depend on her. She teased him by asking if he hid money in his pants like his grandmother, to which Ryan replied that it was none of his business. At that moment, their attention was drawn to an approaching motorcycle. It turned out that Sarah was driving. Ryan pursed his lips and asked why she had come. Sarah frowned, looked at him questioningly, and asked if he'd changed direction. Ryan, slightly surprised, replied that while he'd expected a meeting, he hadn't expected it to turn out quite like this. As they drove through the dense forest, Sarah sat in the front seat wearing her helmet, and Ryan held her tightly in the back. He remarked that they were lucky to have met by chance. She replied that she had eaten too many people and was now going to buy some indigestion pills. Ryan frowned at her words and said nothing, but the question remained in his mind. A moment later, he apologized to her for his past actions and thanked her for the scissors she'd given him. An irritated Sarah lowered her helmeted head, turned sharply, and stopped. Taking off her helmet, she told Ryan to get lost. Sarah accused him of insolence, saying he had used her scissors and then seemed to have forgotten all about her. Celeste, who was watching the proceedings, noticed that Ryan liked to reveal secrets through his behavior. Suddenly, Sarah admitted that she had been waiting for him day and night, even when she ate, washed, and slept. Then Ryan, a little taken aback, raised his hands defensively and explained that she hadn't given him her address. Sarah opened her mouth to reply, but suddenly stopped, frowned, covered her mouth with her hand, and blushed. Unsure of what to say, she turned away, her expression grim. In response to his question, Sarah told Ryan to sit down, assuring him that she would forgive him this time. When he, somewhat embarrassed, asked her what would happen next time, she abruptly stopped the motorcycle in the middle of the road. The motorcycle's headlights illuminated the road ahead, and at that moment Celeste announced they had arrived. Ryan, somewhat surprised, admitted he hadn't expected to find a bank in the secret world. But Celeste explained that this was not a bank at all, but the only trading house in the kingdom, and insisted that he follow her quickly. Then Sarah lowered her head with a mocking smile on her face, and Ryan looked at her sympathetically. However, when Sarah finally realized the real state of affairs, her expression turned sad. The other, Kuchisake Onna, looking seriously at her partner, explained that while Tains were allowed to fall in love, marriages between Tains and humans were strictly forbidden. Sarah admitted that she still doesn't know Ryan's name. He introduced himself with a smile, and she quietly repeated his name as if enjoying it. Suddenly pulling a hairpin out of his hair, she mentioned that this might be their last meeting and offered him a parting gift. She caught him off guard by handing him a hair clip. Ryan was a little stunned, but quickly came to his senses, grinned, and gratefully accepted the gift. As Sarah rode back down the highway on her motorcycle, she thought about the hair clip she had given her, hoping it would come in handy and save her life at a critical moment. But deep down, she hoped he would never have to use it. Ryan, in turn, decided to carefully hide the hairpin so as not to lose it. When he finally arrived at the trading house, he was met by a young man in glasses who greeted him warmly, smiled, and began asking questions about the purpose of his visit. Ryan was pleasantly surprised by such a warm welcome. But the young man suddenly fell to his knees and began to apologize profusely, saying that he was truly sorry to have served such an honored guest, and explaining that the trading house was short-staffed. Ryan quickly realized that the man had mistaken him for Riddle because of the uniform he was wearing. Smiling, the hero extended his hand to help the young man up. However, before he could do anything, the man's head suddenly exploded, splattering Ryan with blood. At that moment, a man with a scar on his face appeared who, noticing the young man's impatience in greeting, commented on what had happened in a restrained manner. As Ryan watched this, he realized that the violent incident no longer affected him, realizing that he had become immune to such incidents. The scarred man sniffed, and noticing a strong human scent, his face darkened. Ryan immediately panicked, thinking he had been exposed, as his uniform did not cover him completely. The man with the scar approached, carefully studying the boy's face and sniffing him like a hunting dog. Finding himself in a hopeless situation, Ryan turned to Olivia for help, who took him by the shoulders, assuring him that she would solve the problem. At that moment, streams of blue energy enveloped Ryan as Celeste ran her hands over his body, commanding him to let her energy into him. Ryan was a little confused by the wording, but he calmed down a bit when she allayed his concerns by stating that people interpret things differently. The injured man's expression changed as the blue energy reached him, and the tension in the air became palpable. Ryan's appearance had changed dramatically. His hair had become light and long, and his red eyes, as if shining with fire, looked menacingly at the man with the scar. Ryan, not hiding his displeasure, demanded an explanation of how the trading company dared to treat a respected client so dismissively. To emphasize his power and strength, he summoned ice chains that filled the air with a loud ringing sound, and spoke in a stern and commanding tone. The scarred man, clearly surprised by what he saw, muttered an apology as if trying to justify his carelessness. However, without relieving the tension, Ryan sternly gave his number and password. He watched as the scarred man bowed awkwardly and rushed towards the requested item. A moment later, he was handed a wooden table on which various tea accessories were neatly arranged. The trembling man, barely holding the cup of yellow liquid in his hands, handed it to Ryan. Meanwhile, the hero sat on a chair, crossing his legs, as if enjoying the moment. Ryan couldn't help but wonder what could have caused such a sudden change in the staff's attitude, which had previously been rather rude. Celeste, noticing his confusion, explained that while she wasn't rich, her presence and reputation in this world carried a certain power. The victim returned, apologized for his previous mistake, and handed the package to Ryan. As soon as another man arrived with a cart and a wooden box, he left them and promised not to disturb the lady again. The double doors closed behind them. Ryan noticed that something was definitely wrong inside the box. Soon, Celeste popped out of Ryan's head, clearly excited, and eagerly unwrapped the box, expecting to find her beautiful head inside. However, when she opened the box, she found only emptiness inside. Celeste froze in shock, and Ryan, worried, looked into the box in hopes of finding what she was looking for. Satisfied that the box was empty, he asked her what had happened. Celeste remained silent, consumed by the dark energy hovering around her, and did not answer his questions. Ryan then politely asked her if she was okay, trying to console her by suggesting that perhaps the head had not yet been found, or that there was not enough ransom money. But Celeste said with bitterness in her voice that she had sent 1 billion crowns in a box, and it had returned empty. She insisted that it was not the money at stake, but the loss of her head, which caused her more pain. Ryan frowned, wondering how she could claim she wasn't rich when she had donated such a huge amount. Meanwhile, Celeste sat dejected, lost in thoughts full of bitterness and despair. She said that money means nothing without her head. The young girl then offered to give Ryan the remaining money, which was still kept in the trading house. Ryan, confused, took her hand and asked how he could help her feel better. Celeste reminded him that they were a team and promised to support each other no matter what. Ryan then, with confidence and determination, assured her that they would find the criminal who had deceived her and return her head and money. At that moment, the hero felt that the ghost girl's sympathy for him had increased significantly. Celeste, touched by his words, hugged him tightly, thanking him for his loyalty and devotion. Ryan, feeling her weight on his shoulders, consoled her, reminding her that she was lucky to have someone she could rely on during this difficult time. Suddenly, their attention was drawn to a giant mechanism located in the center of the room. The loud clanking of gears, like a metallic orchestra, filled the space, and Ryan realized that he might have managed to satisfy the requirement for increasing the sympathy level, which meant that he could now draw energy from this mechanism. A huge wheel began to spin, displaying various abilities such as lethal torture, death traps, rope binding, and energy enhancement. Ryan, full of optimism and self-confidence, hoped that this mechanism would bring him what he wanted. The thought occurred to him that the rope could help him get something more important. He watched the wheel spin with a confident smile, pleased with his cunning strategy and how it might influence his future actions. At that moment, the giant machine's hand hovered over the jump rope option in the temple for a moment, which gave Ryan a terrible fright. He immediately realized that this was not the choice he expected to make, as the consequences could be dire. But the mechanism's hand continued to move as if mocking him, and Ryan screamed, clenching his fists in despair, unable to stop the chaos caused by this mysterious device. At that moment, a yellow taxi was speeding down the highway, its headlights piercing the night void, and Ryan, remembering the system's signals, realized that this surge of energy could be vital. He remembered reading articles about similar abilities before, about a man from the agency who used spiritual attacks through his mind, manipulating people's consciousness and creating illusions. Such attacks were deadly, and now Ryan felt much more confident. Celeste, noticing his thoughts, admitted that sometimes he really did frighten her with his actions. In turn, he, reflecting on her wonderful qualities, called her a peony flower, emphasizing her beauty and unique character. Celeste chuckled and replied that her head was indeed the most attractive. While they were chatting in the back seat of the taxi, the driver glanced in the rearview mirror and pursed his lips, clearly thinking about something. Suddenly, the car stopped abruptly in the middle of the road. The sudden stop shook them. The wheels screeched, and Ryan and Olivia were almost thrown out of their seats. Confused, Ryan leaned forward to ask the driver why they had stopped and what had happened. However, when he turned around, a strange red energy began to emanate from his body, and Ryan, horrified, noticed that insect-like legs were growing on his neck. The driver, with a sinister smile, said that he stopped because he was hungry. Without giving Ryan time to react, he rushed towards them, his eyes blazing with fury and his sharp teeth bared, trying to attack. But Celeste did not lose her composure. She immediately slapped him across the face, ordering him to retreat. Without giving the driver time to recover, she dealt him another crushing blow to the nose, which left Ryan completely stunned and unable to speak. Celeste then grabbed the driver by the collar and pulled him toward her, ignoring the blood streaming from his nose and several broken teeth left by her forceful blows. Furious, she scolded him for daring to behave so brazenly, especially considering it was a low-level matter. The driver, trembling with fear, asked her who she was. Ignoring his words, Celeste sarcastically asked him how difficult it was to be a polite driver before hitting him again. The driver fell to the ground, and Celeste continued kicking him without stopping, expressing all her irritation at his disrespect. Finally, begging for mercy, he clasped his head in his hands, admitted his mistake, and vowed to become a vegetarian from that moment on. Then Celeste, with a sigh, dragged him by the scruff of the neck to the side of the road and left him there without a trace of regret. Ryan, watching the incident, felt a mixture of fear and surprise, not understanding why she beat the driver so brutally. Then Celeste, wiping her hands, looked at Ryan and asked him what happened to him, what his problem was. Ryan hesitated for a moment before deciding to explain that they were in a difficult situation because Celeste had killed the driver. He admitted, among other things, that he absolutely does not know how to drive a car with a manual transmission and that he does not even have a driver's license. Finally, he returned to his room, grumbling that his legs were starting to give out, as if the long journey had finally caught up with him. Celeste teased him and noticed that, despite his fatigue, he still found the strength to change his clothes. Ryan replied that it was a matter of honor for him, especially since his real-life classmates were there too, and he didn't want to look worse. She, in turn, noted that although he was tired, his talkativeness had not disappeared, but apparently he was of little use without a license. Suddenly, the floor under his bed creaked unexpectedly. Alarmed, Ryan leaned over to see what was going on. To his surprise, he found a girl in a school uniform under the bed, apparently hiding there. He froze in place, staring at her in shock, and she pressed her lips together, holding back her reaction to express her surprise. Then Ryan, frightened and unable to believe what was happening, stepped back and let out a cry of surprise. The girl quickly covered his mouth with her hand, whispering that he should be silent and not wake the commander. At that moment, the door creaked open. The girl deftly pounced on Ryan, covered his mouth with her hand, and whispered that the situation was, to put it mildly, unpleasant. The commander's angular figure stood frozen in the doorway, his face hidden in shadow. Ryan and the girl stared at him tensely, unsure of what to do. The commander, unnaturally tilting his head to the side, asked why they hadn't gone to bed yet, since the lights had been turned off long ago. Then Ryan, pale with fear, jumped up and hastened to say that he had just returned from a long walk and had not been allowed to rest. Meanwhile, footsteps echoed throughout the ruined dormitory and rats scurried across the floor and windowsills. Bruno, worried that he and Lenny were still isolated, noticed that there were only 2 of them left. Then Jan, with a predatory smile, replied that the others were only looking for themselves and had no intention of helping. They hadn't eaten for several days and decided it was time to search for clues while they still had the strength. Bruno sternly warned that if they didn't find anything that day, they would have to leave the Upside Down. Suddenly, Lenny's face twisted, and it seemed to him that these would be Hugo's last words. Meanwhile, the commander stood at the door of Ryan's room, his skin gray and an ominous green liquid dripping from his mouth. He reminded Ryan and the girl that they were supposed to go to bed after lights out and asked questioningly why they were still making noise. Ryan, realizing that they couldn't do without a weapon, took out scissors from his pocket, and the girl quickly hid under the bed, declaring that they could handle the situation without her help. Ryan remembered with bitterness how his comrades always avoided confrontation and decided that this time he would have to face the threat himself. He tried to explain to the commander that he couldn't sleep because he was saving the world and fighting over 300 monsters that had invaded the region. The commander frowned and tried to make sense of his incoherent speech. Ryan then continued, adding that he remembered having to go back to his room after the lights went out, but along the way he suddenly gained the strength to fight the monsters. The commander, without taking his eyes off him and continuing to drool, remained silent, satisfied with the observation. Suddenly, he lunged towards Ryan with incredible force, as if he had suddenly realized that this was not a fantasy. Ryan, reacting with lightning speed, defended himself with scissors and managed to strike, forcing the commander to retreat. Celeste, who was watching what was happening, offered to use her power, but Ryan refused, deciding that he could handle the situation himself. Although he understood that he was not yet capable of fighting low-level secret forces without outside help, he still decided to reduce his reliance on Olivia. He had to try to get used to the role of the main character in this unusual world. At that moment, Ryan, overcome with despair, clicked his tongue. He grabbed the scissors and rushed towards the commander, shouting that he must die. At that very moment, a dull noise was heard in the courtyard, and the atmosphere in the room became tense. At that moment, the director was pacing nervously in the office, trying to cope with the anxiety growing within him. Meanwhile, Marcus sat quietly, smiling and quickly getting ready to eat, as if not noticing what was happening. The manager finally turned to Marcus and, with a slight sigh, mentioned that there were only a few hours left before the restrictions on returns were lifted. He suggested doing this in advance since the students had already completed all the necessary work, but despite this, he expressed concern for their safety, noting that if something happened to anyone, responsibility would fall on them. He added that the department, as always, was trying to avoid trouble, to which Marcus responded, however, that the decision to keep the students in this place for 2 days was not his. The man explained that over the years, the stone's strength had diminished, and its structure had begun to weaken. So even if there had been talk of a forced ban, it was more an attempt to avoid confusion than an actual ban. He recalled that similar incidents had happened before, for example, when a commander was held in custody for 10 days. The principal frowned and reminded Marcus that this time it wasn't the commander inside, but ordinary schoolchildren whose lives were in danger. Marcus, putting down his cutlery and thinking for a moment, agreed with the director, but noted that the students represented their last hope for the future. He took out a pack of cigarettes and asked the director if he knew why the Bureau of Oddity Investigation had interfered with the graduation ceremony and ordered a new test. He explained that under normal circumstances, students would first undergo initiation into the Upside Down, and then enter the university, where they would become full members of the Bureau. However, in light of recent events involving the mysteries, the leaders have decided to immediately accept exceptional travelers into their ranks if they agree voluntarily. The school principal expressed his outrage, saying that even enrolling students at 18 was too early, and that if the age of entry into secondary school were lowered, it would be a real disaster for the whole society. But Marcus objected that this problem needed to be solved, since the secret of eternal fear had recently appeared in the city. He explained that this mystery feeds on people's fear, although it is only the 4th level, which has already caused the death of several travelers from the 3rd level. In addition, many passengers who were at a lower level of training were also killed or seriously injured. Marcus was clearly reluctant to share all the details with the director, but despite this, he firmly believed that each of them was responsible for protecting the state and its future. Suddenly, like a clap of thunder, there was a loud knock on the door, which made them both jump in surprise. Marcus's assistant, Irma, burst into the room and informed them that the secret of endless fear was approaching them. Radar detected its rapid approach, requiring immediate action. Marcus responded immediately, ordering the evacuation of all students. The principal expressed concern about the large number of students who might be in danger, but Marcus assured him that he would assess the situation and take the necessary measures. But he also stressed the importance of getting children to safety as quickly as possible. At that moment, Irma, grabbing Marcus by the sleeve, begged him not to act rashly and to evacuate with the students, witnesses to this murder. Irma then asked them why they were taking so long to think and told them to sign the documents quickly. At that moment, Celeste said that the guy who was shot in the head was shrouded in a strange secret power. Simply put, it was a planned trap. At that moment, Marcus entered the office and said that he asked Anna not to scare these children. In response, the girl turned away and said that he was simply very boring. At that moment, David rushed towards Marcus, grabbed his leg, and began to cry. He asked him if he would be killed if he did not take the position, but the man said that he would not kill him and then pushed him away. Kyle was quite upset that this man treated him so dismissively. Marcus then approached the protagonist and asked him to stop calling him so formally and simply call him brother. Ryan then asked him if he had also taken part in this performance. Marcus said he was quite smart, and that was what he liked most about him. He said the agency had turned out to be almost nothing like what Ryan had imagined and asked if he wanted to know more. In response, the hero stated that he hadn't expected to witness a brutal murder when he came here, and then have someone threaten him, trying to force him to sign documents. He believed that the people working in the office were quite serious.